when I get it, figure out how to set it up, it's a Ultimate USB Yeti. We'll see if that works.
That's a good brand.
I've seen I like the headset.
I've seen that particular model recommended for Zoom hearings.
Huh. One of these days I'll try it out.
This meeting of the Medfield Board of Selectmen brought to you by Yeti. Call your local Yeti dealer. Enter promo code Gus Murby at checkout. All right. I think we're ready to go. It's 7 o'clock. We'll call this meeting to order. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30, Section 18, and the Governor Baker's March 15, 2020 order placing strict limitations on the number of people who can gather in any one place. This meeting of the Medfield Board of Selectmen is being conducted via remote participation, and no in-person attendance of any members of the public is permitted. However, every effort has been made to ensure that persons wishing to view this meeting while in progress may do so. You are reminded, if you've somehow joined this meeting without knowing this, that instructions on how to join this meeting and view it while in progress may be found on the meeting notice. Because this meeting is being conducted remotely, all votes are roll call votes. I will note that Selectman Gus Murby and Osler Peterson and Mike Marcucci, we are all participating remotely. We are not meeting together now on the second floor of Town Hall. This meeting, as all our meetings, are being video recorded, and we will begin by taking a moment of appreciation for our troops serving around the globe in defense of our country. All right, well, welcome everyone. And we will start with our first appointment. The Board of Water and Sewerage is here to discuss the water treatment plant project, owner's project management services, and our favorite SCADA system services. Welcome to the Board of Water and Sewerage.
It was a great intro, Mike, for your first time as the chair. You left out the hear you part, but other than that,
I've been practicing all day, Gus. Christian, Mo, Randy, hello.
Good evening.
And Bill, welcome.
Greetings, everyone.
Welcome.
We're just coming fresh off of a water board and sewerage meeting just 10 minutes ago. So we're feeling pretty fresh.
Well hydrated.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what do you have for us here? We've got the water treatment plant project discussion, owner's project management services, and the SCADA system.
Sure. So as a board, as we've been going through the looking at the project costs, and as we have gone, we've launched the bidding, certain aspects of the bidding of this project, as well as preparation for the ATM, and also in preparation for the rate setting process for fiscal 2022. I don't know if it's brought to our attention, but we realized by reading through some of the documents that were prepared for this project, for both the bidding in the pre-construction phase, as well as the post-construction phase, that, we found something that wasn't quite aligned to, I think, what whether it's a selectman or other committee members would think is optimum. And we wanted to summarize that. I, of course, come with slides, like I always do.
Slide away.
Yeah, slide away. Let me see if I can share my screen. For those who haven't taken time to learn what SCADA is or means, I'm going to touch on that briefly. Also, just the project structure, how the procurement is sort of structured, and some perspectives for the Board of Selectmen to consider, as well as the rest of the board members and other members, other participants to comment on along the way. So let me just take, I've got some cartoons assembled here. This project, for a typical structure of a turnkey plant, it's quite typical that a town like Medfield hires both an OPM to act on the behalf of the town itself, as well as hiring a separate firm to actually do the construction design and construction engineering during the project. And as part of the construction, there is a general contractor. And in this particular project, they would have a variety of subcontractors. They would have a filter subcontractor, someone who supplies the actual gizmo itself. But there's a lot of other things. There's civil works, there's the building itself. And there's one aspect of it called application engineering, which is embodied in something called SCADA. So what is SCADA? SCADA is a fun acronym that stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. The short of it is, it's a computer and a computer network. It's an industrial type of computer and computer language so that you can connect different types of machines and you have a sort of a centralized way of managing machines as well as data flow that comes in and out of the machines, and also where you embody the optimizations and alarms and things like that. So for industrial processes, it's sort of the brains for controlling a bunch of unit operations so that they're working in harmony. So for this type of scope of work, it's typical that someone would supply the industrial computers, the network equipment, and then the cabinets where things feed into with electronics and whatnot. And then the actual code, the program that controls the filters themselves, as well as the wells that feed the building where the filtration plant's going to be. So in a way, the architectural engineer, the application engineering with the SCADA equipment really is the hardware and the brains that makes the facility work. So this is a classic sort of structure that when you go out and you execute a project, it's not the only structure, but it is probably one of the more common ones. So this is a diagram here where over here on the right, you've got the filters that would be on the plant. You would probably have a local panel, a box, an industrial box to have where wires go into it from different valves and different instruments that go into this. But that communicates all the way into the nice, cool control room where the operators are sitting and they're looking at the unit operations here. And the pictures here are courtesy of Hungerford and Terry and Grundfos and, frankly, Google. Kind of pulled this together today. But so this would be typical where there's a screen and the operators would, because of the SCADA, because of the program that's in there, this is where they look at the unit operations, understand where it is, is it going to be backwash soon? Are chemical tanks running low, or is everything okay? If there's alarms or getting near alarms, this would be the trip points and the alarms would be featured, and also where the operators can actually govern the use of these different things. And also out in the field, down in the bottom left, you have a well, which is just taking water out of the ground as it's coming through the gravel and sand. And that will also have a small panel. It'll be in the well house, and that will also be communicating to the control room. So when we talk about AE SCADA, that's what this is. It's these industrial computers and the networks that support that, and that's what the SCADA is. So our current procurement is a little bit different. The project, just to remind everybody, it's about a $12 million project all in, and where we're spending it is around $195,000 for the owner's project manager. And we have engineering construction for about 1.32 million, which is a lot of the engineering and the field presence during construction. The general contractor estimate is just come in just under $9 million. And the way that this has come together in the last few weeks is that the one preference was for the town to purchase this SCADA package directly from a list of approved bidders. And that's around $222,000 is a placeholder that we're using for the budget. And if anyone here is online just trying to check my math, this isn't all going to add up because there's also about 1.28 million in contingency. Any questions on this? No? Okay.
I do, Bill.
Okay.
So out of a $12 million project, for some reason, it makes sense for the town to directly buy $222,000 worth of equipment. I don't understand the rationale.
Okay, that's a perfect question that leads into my next slide. There are benefits of these two different structures. In the typical structure, you have a general contractor. It's a single entity that the town enters into an agreement to, and they're responsible for really accountability for the supply and the performance of all the subcontractors. And also they really are the single entity for the performance of the filter plant. In case if something isn't quite right, at the end of the day, does the filter plant making the water that it's supposed to with the right purity? You have a single place to apply resolution and leverage. One of the challenges of that, however, is that the contractor has some latitude to pick some of the specified equipment and suppliers or their equals as part of their scope of supply. So it's a long explanation for if you fell in love with a certain kind of pump, you might not get that exact pump if there is an approved equal for something like that. So in this current structure, the town's approach is that there is an interest in having that purchased directly because it brings in a higher possibility for the town to choose this SCADA operation directly from someone who's already doing work within Medfield today. The challenge with that, however, is that there's sort of a greater burden in the town and the OPM to sort of manage that. So now you've got, like, just as you sort of were alluding to, Gus, why would we do that? Well, because of this benefit, but there is a challenge that you have to really, it's kind of on the town's OPM and really to make sure that there's no gap in scope of supply or engineering or to make something work. So that is that is something that could be a challenge in that structure. And also, if at the end of the day, if the programming for the filter plant is driven by this, it is, that's one of the challenges, that if there is a scope gap or there's a performance gap, the OPM would put a stronger burden on them to resolve this on our behalf. So it does put a bigger sort of strain on that as a possibility. I've been in this industry supplying water filtration equipment, not this exact type. I don't work for an employer, so I have no conflicts, but I have supplied equipment, these filters for other purposes before, and I've worked in the municipal field. And I have seen that occasionally that when this does happen, there can be some gaps. Doesn't mean it is not, it's not unresolvable. It's just, it can be sometimes less than optimum. The other benefit, it can be argued that if you pull something out, then the general contractor is not marking it up. But I don't personally know how much they would mark up 222,000 to if it was in the typical project. It's not a sort of a big line item. So why are we here today? Because
Bill, can I hit you first with a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Why not just specify the SCADA equipment you want in the contract for the general contractor? If for whatever, I'm guessing it's a compatibility issue with other SCADA equipment we have, why not just tell them this is the SCADA equipment we want you to use?
So we do have 3 approved for procurement. We need to, if we're going to specify something, we have to have or equal. And we have 3 firms who have been qualified as, well, I think there is one that is possibly likely preferred, and then the other 2 are equal.
So you're saying if we contract directly, we'll be able to force that decision, but we can't write it into the specification on a general contract?
Well, for something of this size, we will go out to bid for that, but the way that we evaluate it would be different than the way a general contractor would evaluate it.
All right.
So to get back to this wide slide of why we're here, what we've found out in the course of executing the first OPM, and as the project was moving through us in the last 6 or 8 weeks, we realized that Woodward and Curran is our OPM for the pre-bid, as well as they are we believe it's going to be the OPM for the construction phase. However, it also turns out that Woodward and Curran is one of the approved firms and preferred firms for the SCADA system itself. So in some dialogue within the board and others, what we see is a potential conflict of interest that if Woodward and Curran is both the OPM as well as a supplier where Medfield is not only purchasing from this directly, but the output from Woodward and Curran is also, could be, affecting the actual ultimate performance of the plant itself. So it's not just because, this is to say that we like Woodward and Curran almost this much that we want them in both places, but there could be an apparent, the optics are really not that great. And to the point, Gus, that you expressed earlier, that it's sort of a small line item, but it's also this is my opinion, that it's also has a big effect on, ultimately, does the plant, work, at the end. There are 4 basic choices in this situation. I tried to show the diagrams up here. One of the choices is that we go to the traditional model and we put the SCADA scope inside the contract for the general contractor. And what we would do is we would actually issue an addendum to the bidding contractors that this would be part of the scope of supply. It's currently not, and for them to bid with that inclusion. The second choice would be to allow Woodward and Curran to be both the OPM and the supplier directly to Medfield. So in other words, directly as is, but we have this appearance of a conflict of interest. The third option is to allow Woodward and Curran to continue as the OPM in the construction phase, but not allow them as a SCADA supplier, so that they would not be, in the mix for the SCADA. So where you see the line through here, they would not be featured as a supplier, and we would the other 2 or 3 would remain. And the fourth option would be to allow Woodward and Curran to bid on the SCADA system. And for the construction part of this, we would actually engage with the other bidder for the OPM, which is Western and Samsung, and then they would take Samsung, and they would take over as the OPM over here, as you see in the bottom right, as the OPM, and Woodward and Curran would be one of the possible suppliers for the SCADA system. It's kind of a lot to digest. I'll stop sharing here. So we're just looking for a little bit of clarity because it's a big, to me, I kind of got onto this. I got into this board because of this project, something like 8 years ago. And I just want to sort of set it in motion. And so it's harmonized and everybody executes according to good, clean roles. And we're trying to make sure that whatever we do, that the rest of that the selectmen and permanent planning committee, as well as others, are okay with the structure that we use for procurement going forward with this project.
So if I could just add a couple of things, this is a little bit of an unusual one for us because I think the three of us as a board each are coming at this situation with there's some nuance. From my perspective, Bill showed those 4 options up there. I think it seems to me that all 4 of those are probably viable. And we had the conversation with Woodard and Curran and with EPG on the phone, and both companies said this is an approach that's been used successfully before. Neither of them expressed that they thought this was an unusual approach. It struck me as unusual just in my own work experience, and Bill felt the same way. But I'm kind of reliant on the people who do this for a living to have some insights into whether this is a manageable structure. The other thing I wanted to say is, to me, if Woodard and Curran can be the OPM and can also provide the SCADA support for the project, I guess I don't see a huge difference between us contracting with them directly and us allowing them to contract for the general contractor. But I guess I don't see that either they are under the structure or they're not. So for me, if we're not going to allow them to contract separately, if we think that's inappropriate, then it seems to me equally inappropriate for us to allow them to be a sub on the project. Because I think you've still got the same conflict of interest.
Yeah.
You're kind of one level removed, but it's still there.
I share all those thoughts too. The meeting that we had with Woodwin Curran and an EPG, was it a week or 2 ago? I went back and I just listened to it all over again. But I found myself making other notes that, even Paul Millett of EPG said it would be, difficult to do it in that format and really not have conflict concerns. And then Renee Lanza from Wood and Curran said that everything goes through a general contractor. If we put it inside a general contractor, then everything goes through them resolved, and that's sort of their job. And that even if Wood and Curran was a subcontractor there, they would provide that separation, but it's not a guarantee of separation. So I think both firms recognize that, could it be done? But I think it would have to be not just under ideal situations, but probably have to be monitored. My last concern is that it would affect the bidding process, especially if someone wanted to bid to something and that there was a conflict as part of the procurement process. I think you get all the reasonable people in the room. We're gonna manage any sort of conflicts to the right resolution. I'm just trying to think, is there a way to set this up that's preferentially better so that we can eliminate more of the conflicts if possible and if practical.
So may I ask, and I'll turn it over to Pete and Gus for questions first, but I assume that the fact that you're presenting these 4 options is that all 4 of these options are legal under state procurement rules and whatever rules are governing the town. Is that correct, Mark and Christine?
I'll let Mark weigh in on the legal.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
so you got to distinguish in Massachusetts between building construction, vertical construction, and public works construction. The building construction is highly regulated with respect to designers, requirement for an OPM, and the whole GC process. Very, very detailed regulation. Ironically, even though a public works project such as this can far exceed the cost of a building, you don't have the same regulation. It's very loosey-goosey. There's no requirement for an OPM. So obviously they're not under any particular legal constraints. I guess what's striking me here is why, in my experience, and we have an identical project proceeding in Franklin, and we've had other projects of this type, you generally have an engineering firm that you've retained that's acting like a designer or like an architect that's designing the project, is then going to oversee construction of the project, and they have a project manager that they assign to you. The whole premise for an OPM is to keep prices under control, because what they were finding in the building issue was architects were basing their fees on a percentage of the cost of the project. They had no incentive to keep costs under control, and costs were going wild. And that's why OPMs were brought in by statute for building projects. But you don't have the same considerations in public works projects, generally speaking. So I'm curious why the setup is like this with so much reliance upon an OPM to begin with.
Well, I don't know about reliance, but we were told by Mike Quinlan that we need to have an OPM on this project. So it's a structure that we have.
I guess it sounds like maybe, at least speaking for myself, I misconstrued the role of the OPM here. What you're describing, Mark, is a role that's maybe less day-to-day management and more day-to-day just checking in, kind of an oversight role, less, not really a sort of a direct engagement.
Well, again, there's no, in a public works project, as I said, a lot of the considerations driving an OPM in a building project simply aren't there. There's nothing wrong with having somebody, whether it's whatever you call the person, whether it's a clerk of the works or it's an OPM or whatever, in terms of oversight and all. But whoever the engineering firm is that you've engaged for this project should have the primary responsibility, and there should be a project manager and a team that takes the lead for overseeing the construction.
And it sounds, Mark, like we have that. So I think we've answered the legal question that all of these structures are legal. And so we can kind of choose between them on a prudential basis. I'll let my colleagues ask what questions they have first, and then I've got a couple. So Pete, questions or comments?
Bill, did I understand you to say that that Weston, Woodard and Curran was your preferred for the SCADA materials?
The fact that they're doing work in town, and they also have knowledge to our 3-year plan of SCADA within both water and sewer. It gives them in a way they have that insight. They're not coming in fresh. But that's like, what are you getting? You're getting people on one side,
Bill,
domain knowledge. There's also equipment.
Sorry, Bill, I'd like for Mo to weigh in here. I think he's kind of driving this.
I think Woodard and Curran right now is maintaining our SCADA system. They rehabbed it from what it was from a proprietary system. Now it's become, they've melded everything together to make it work. So we're slowly improving the system as we move forward. They've been there from the start to rehab, and it's working right now. I'd hate to see another company come in to have to learn the whole system, and they would still need Woodard and Curran's coordination to have it to make it work with our existing system. So it's not just to bring in supplies into the treatment plant. I feel it's more of an engineering, applications engineering, where they're making it compatible to work with our system, so that we don't get false alarms, that we don't get a system, two separate systems in one. And I think that's why we we feel that Woodard and Curran should be our applications engineer in the SCADA system. They also happen to be the OPM, but we were looking to pull that out of the contract of the general contractor and do it as a professional services with Woodard and Curran, and keeping it separate from the GC and let that to be the construction end of the project.
So yes, you do want Woodard and Curran to be running the SCADA. So
It makes sense to have someone that's familiar with the system and knows all the heartache that they went through to make everything work for us.
okay, so that's important to me. I just wondered, Randy, whether you had any different. Chris,
No,
you talked about nuances.
I was going to make the same points that Mo is making. If we take the SCADA integration work for this project and put it underneath the general contractor, you still have an interface between that work and the work that Woodard and Curran is currently doing to upgrade our legacy system. So Mo's thought on this is that if you put all of that integration work into one place, that reduces the risk of incompatibilities between the new SCADA integration work related to this project and the legacy upgrade SCADA work that Woodard and Curran is currently doing. I mean, typically, when you're doing an upgrade of a legacy system, you're not working with a complete set of documentation. So there's a lot of field inspections and unwritten specifications that Woodard and Curran has gained by their work with the town. If you're going to bid this out with a specification, you'd spend a fair amount of work to write a spec for the integration work. So I'm aligned with Mo's point of view on this. I think you also need to understand from a conflict of interest standpoint, Woodard and Curran's SCADA integration work is a couple $100,000 out of a $12 million project. I don't see a huge risk for having Woodard and Curran having both OPM responsibility for construction and commissioning, in addition to having another part of their organization continuing on doing SCADA integration work for this project as part of an overall system upgrade that they've been engaged in for probably a couple of years now, I believe.
I got word from Woodard and Curran that they checked with the Attorney General's office, and they didn't feel it was a conflict of interest with this project.
Yeah, I don't have a legal opinion on that. I defer to Mark on that. But if we think by rolling the SCADA integration work that's related to this new equipment under the general contractor, and that relieves us of having to manage a relationship between Woodard and Curran and the rest of the project, that's not true, because Woodard and Curran is already here. We're going to have to manage that relationship. If the general contractor puts this out to bid and a different SCADA integration supplier is selected by them, then now you have to manage the interface between that group and Woodard and Curran, who's upgrading our legacy system. So you don't eliminate the risk of an interface between two entities.
Pete, anything else? Oh, yeah.
I'm gathering that well, Mark's suggesting that he's questioning whether we really need an owner's project manager or not, but I guess I'm not able to really weigh in on that.
Well, I've got an opinion on that too.
For Chapter 149, it's required to have an OPM for this project.
I think if you look at Mo's staff, he's got a very competent staff of people to operate these facilities on a day-by-day basis and to do small capital projects and improvements. He does not have a technical staff. In my experience in the industrial sector, we'd probably have at least one person that we call the manufacturing representative who would make sure the dadgum thing was going to work, as designed and as they were building and making changes. Mo doesn't have anybody on his staff to fill that role. And I think an OPM is essential for this kind of a project, to make sure that somebody's really looking after the details on a day-by-day basis. So that's my opinion on the OPM. Whether it's required by law or not required, I think it's money well spent.
Yep, that's very helpful. Thank you. I'm sorry,
Mr.
Mark.
Chairman,
Yes, Mark.
All right, so first of all, I don't object to an OPM. It's a good idea because, as I said, an OPM does whatever it is you tell that firm to do. There's nothing etched in stone as to what they will or will not do. So the second pair of eyes, the oversight, that's fine. But this is like an eyes on the prize situation that what you're discussing tonight, frankly, is all over here. It's a collateral issue. The real focus on these projects has got to be, and this would go to the OPM as well, to focus with laser precision on the engineering firm that's leading the project and what they prepare for plans and specs. Because if they screw up in those plans and specs, it becomes a very, very expensive project as it proceeds. This is a particular area where the kinds of contractors and subs that you attract are looking for opportunities to charge extras or for subsurface conditions or what have you, which would make the project skyrocket. And one way that happens is when you don't have tight specs and tight plans that are all consistent among themselves. So that should be the primary function of the OPM, whoever it is, to scrutinize that stuff before it ever hits the street. And then they analyze the bidders as they come in, do the due diligence to make sure that the extent possible, you've got quality bidders that don't have a lot of baggage with them. Because again, there's a great mix out there.
So again, it sounds to me like you're saying that we should have an OPM for this project then. So then I guess my last question is, I understood that Woodard and Curran was our preferred selection for the OPM. Is that right?
Yes, we had two
Yes.
firms submitted, and Woodard and Curran was determined to be more highly qualified than the other firm.
So I guess, you know, if the state doesn't think it's a conflict of interest and we're getting the things that we want, which involves Woodard and Curran in two different slots, I guess I'm not offended. So thank you.
Yes.
Is this a design build contract or is this just a design contract?
There's a contract to design and there's a contract to build.
So it'll be design bid. So the design will be done and then it'll be put out to build it.
Yeah,
the bid right now.
the bids are out, the specs are out in the street for the general contractor already.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is that contract both for the general contractor to design this plant
No,
and to build
No,
it?
the design has already been done by environmental partners. Once
Ah.
they finished the design, now it went out to bid to get a general contractor for construction.
Okay,
And Woodard and Curran is on board as the OPM during this phase, and they have gone through all the specs and you know, provided their comments, which were incorporated.
so Wooden and Curran already is on board as the OPM.
For the pre-construction, before the bidding.
Reconstruction.
Yeah.
Okay,
And they have an option to continue during the construction period.
Right.
all right.
It-
So,
To me, maybe the operative question is, if we like the idea of buying directly from Woodward and Curran for the SCADA project, are they also the desired OPM as well, or do we use the alternate?
yeah, so the problem I have is that I don't actually understand this kind of a treatment plant well enough to be able to judge the risks that are going on. So I think based, Mo, on what you said, the way I'm looking at it, I'm saying, okay, there's two questions here. Who do you care more about Woodard and Curran coming in for the SCADA equipment, or do you care more about Woodard and Curran coming in as the OPM? And I think the answer to that is you care more about Woodard and Curran being there for the SCADA equipment for reasons that make a heck of a lot of sense to me if you've already got them doing all the rest of the SCADA equipment. So that piece, in terms of just what's the priority, in terms of what's more important to have the preference, I think that's what I understand in your answers, is the bigger driver for Woodard and Curran is around the SCADA equipment itself, because they're already doing that work for us here in town. Is that a fair?
I think the skater part of it is important. I think we want Woodard and Curran, but they are the preferred OPM as well, which is I know what you're saying. Out of the two, to me on my end, for production end, the skate is more important to me, but it depends on what side of the fence you sit on. With the permanent planning building committee, it's more on the construction side. And some other people would think the OPM is more important.
And so the part that I'm just in the dark on is I don't know how to assess the significance of the risk of moving. So you've got Woodard and Curran providing outside of the general contractor contract, the skate equipment. I don't know how big the risk to the town is that the skate equipment doesn't mesh with the construction of the plant. And suddenly what you have is this weird situation where the vendor of the SCADA equipment is also the overseer. So if something goes wrong and the general contractor doesn't feel like they want to take responsibility for it, I'm trying to play that argument out, and it doesn't sound like it would go in a good direction, but I don't know how big a deal that is. And so that's my blind spot in terms of judging how big a deal it is to break
I can
that
speak
stuff
to
out.
that a little bit.
Okay.
If you believe the thought and the reasoning that it would take a lot of specifications in order to create a standalone a standalone bidder that's put inside the general contractor, or it's a specification for someone to bid to as a standalone procurement directly to the town, there's specification to have to be generated for that by EPG in order for that to be put on the street.
Mhm.
To the extent of which that is clearly represented, and the SCADA bidder bids to that, if there is a problem, what we don't have is someone who is not Woodward and Curran to resolve a difference between actually EPG's design and what we bought directly.
Mhm.
So that's where I've seen gaps in this. And like I said, it's a $12 million project, and we're talking about a $222,000 scope of supply. And so the risk is, in a way, that's what makes this so disproportionate in a way. But I also know that, a lot of things that are problems tend to be, well, something was not itemized for the wire run for this device to be connected somewhere, and it is part of the programming, and that Mo is going to see it on the screen. So it's more like scope creep and omissions that Woodward and Curran would have to do more work if there is an omission. So our risk would be actually in absorbing the cost or paying for a change order of an omission that's like that. And we would need to have, an OPM to help us either resolve that and what's in our best interest with that path forward, or we pay it outright. And that's where the small challenge is. If Woodward and Curran is in the OPM house, then if there is a gap between EPG and what the bidder for the SCADA, there was the gap there, we wouldn't really have a unconflicted OPM part of that.
Mhm.
So that's the most probable situation and the most probable risk. I think it's resolvable, but I believe that those are the risks and the exposures.
Yeah, I think I may have been seeing it. You probably articulated it better there, Bill. I'm saying, well, on one hand, you have Woodward and Curran, the SCADA equipment supplier, that probably has to work collaboratively with the general contractor to ensure that the SCADA equipment is properly integrated with the overall, design and construction of the plant itself. At the same time that same company is, as OPM, potentially giving some degree of direction to the general contractor. So you're kind of both above the general contractor and below the general contractor organizationally. I think you may have different different teams. I just don't know how to assess that risk in terms of its significance.
Can I weigh in on that, Gus?
Sure.
I don't think the OPM is going to be providing a whole lot of direction here. I think EPG, Environmental Partners Group, they are the guys who are going to be on site, managing the contractor, looking out for our interests as our designer. They're there. They're the ones who are responsible to make sure that their design is being implemented. The general contractor is doing his job, and the two parties, Woodard and Curran, as the SCADA supplier and the general contractor, are playing nicely together. Not throwing sand at one another here. The OPM's role is I think at a higher level where they're making sure that the money is being well spent, the change orders that are being requested are reasonable,
Okay.
and that EPG is doing its job before they bring something to us or when they bring something to us.
And the reason EPG can't play that role is because they have a conflict because they're the designers.
Well,
Correct.
they are.
Yes.
They are in that role as our designers. They're going to be on site as kind of managing the project day to day.
Then my only other comment, Bill, on those four options is, from my standpoint, option 3 is not really an option because it's inferior. Either you're dealing with option 1. Initially, I said, well, option 3 and option 2 aren't options, but if an option of Woodward and Curran at both OPM and SCADA, that's option 2. If that's an option, then that's fine. It's an option. But to me, option 3 doesn't get you anything that either option 1 or 4 got you. So, in other words, if I was right that the main driver here was you want Woodward and Curran providing you with the SCADA equipment, then your option 3 is giving that up, and that doesn't make you any better off than you would be with 1. So. All right, I've exhausted my insights to the extent I even had any. It's all yours, Mike.
Yeah. So, I mean, starting with the premise that this is permissible, so that the people who regulate this sort of thing don't have a categorical prohibition on it. The question for me is what value would the OPM's oversight of the SCADA supplier bring to the process versus the value that having one firm playing this connecting role would bring to the process, and what level of oversight, if any, can the existing folks at the town, perhaps in consultation with environmental partners, bring to Woodard and Curran in their SCADA supplier role. And from a financial standpoint, it seems pretty clear that there's not going to be a lot of value in having a different OPM squeezing the SCADA supplier for lower prices, right? If it's already $222,000, and maybe you can lean on them to get it to 215 or something, but it's not like it's a $4 or $5 million contract where there might be a lot of value with the OPM leaning on the SCADA supplier. And I had the same question that Gus or Pete had as to which of these is the more important role. And obviously it seems like the SCADA supplier is the more important role for really, really good reasons. So I guess I think whatever risk would come or whatever value would be added from having an outside OPM overseeing the SCADA supplier, you might lose it in bringing in an OPM who hasn't been working on this project from the outset. And so you kind of have, there's downsides to each of them. And while the conflict is something, I'm glad you raised it. I'm glad this is something that we're talking through. I would think that given the dollars we're talking about, the conflict is resolvable, and I'd probably be more concerned about additional costs or additional issues trying to bring Weston and Sampson up to speed on the project to effectively be an OPM just for the purpose of oversight of this one part of the project where Woodard and Curran is going to be the superior provider given the other work that it's doing. And so, I mean, my instinct is to say that the conflict is resolvable with the oversight that we have, particularly with the Water and Sewer Board and environmental partners. I just don't see, and Bill or Christian, tell me if I'm missing something. I don't see a major problem that's going to arise that would be solved by an OPM catching something that Woodard and Curran in its SCADA supplier role was doing that it shouldn't be doing, or a mistake it was making.
Yeah, the only, I agree with actually everybody on a lot of these points. The only thing that triggered me a bit is that the scope of supply this is to bring all of the programming from the filter manufacturer and their algorithms that actually are used to run the plant. And those are the ones ultimately are responsible for making sure that the plant does what it does. If this was SCADA system just to send a signal to get the plant to turn on, that would be one thing, but the SCADA system actually runs the plant itself. So if this was just a point to point where our tank says I'm low, or the pressure says I need more water, and the water plant turns on. If it was just a turn on off switch, which is sort of what we have right now, that would be one thing. But the fact that this is going into the plant itself and they're supplying panels and also using the programming that's coming from the suppliers itself is going into the code, master code that they write. That's where they start touching the treatment equipment. And that's where I got, that's where my ears perked up a little bit, because that's when you start, that's where the parts can be like more challenging to manage. And ultimately, that's what governs if the plant is actually working. You can have I'm not saying we have a $12 million plant, and no water's not getting made, but if it's not being made either according to spec or optimized the way that we expect, it's that control philosophy that's being brought in from the subcontractors in their methodology for how the chemical pumps turn on and the backwash rates and things like that. So that's the part that has me on a little bit of alert. But to me, that is really the fine point of the risk. But if everyone else feels that it's a manageable risk and that all of the parties are going to, play along in a professional manner, and frankly, if we have the budget for some overage or some shortfall in scope, call it 20,000 or say it's a $50,000. We have that in our contingency right now. So the project is not at fiscal risk. Could be a little bit on the execution risk to resolve gaps that are like that. So I think we're fiscally running okay for what we think might be, a perceived process guarantee performance risk that would be really on the burden of actually the general contractor, really, because that's the core of this is who has the performance risk, and is it the general contractor or is it the SCADA system provider? And that's actually the question I haven't asked yet, and I think that's just one kernel that's there. But like I said, I think fiscally we have the money for what would be a perceivable gap in supply.
Yeah, if I might just answer one of those questions you just raised, Bill, the way this contract and process description and scope of work for the general contractor is described, the actual control of the equipment in the filtration plant is part of the general contractor's scope of work. So turning on a pump or opening or closing a valve around a filter, the general contractor already owns all of that scope of work.
Well, that's the scope of supplying the equipment, but not the software and the algorithm to actually to run the plant itself.
The sequence of operations is described in the EPG contract, in the EPG design, and the integration. The town's part of this is integrating all of those controls of the local equipment into the larger SCADA system, which allows an operator either in another building or remotely to supervise that equipment. So I think the risk of the equipment operating appropriately as described by the control narrative, that's already inside the general contractor's scope of work. Woodard and Kern will just be integrating an oversight and point of view into that equipment. They're not going to be writing the actual control code and sequence of operations for the filters and the pumps that are being installed on this project. So most of the automation work that's going to be done is in the general contractor's scope of work already, including the programming, as I read the contract and the design.
Yeah, I guess I read it differently. Okay.
So Bill, your issue about performance risk, I think, was where I started with my first question. Randy, what I hear you saying is that at least in your reading of the contract, the performance risk rests with the general contractor.
I
And,
think
and Bill,
that's the way I read it.
okay, and Bill, your discussion of those risks, to me, falls under the SCADA equipment supplier. Given the relatively narrow description of the OPM's role, which is kind of to make sure that the town is honestly charged for the work that gets done, not technical direction of the overall effort. My sense would be that those risks you've called out would be a risk independent of who the OPM is. It's the risk that comes with the SCADA supplier, whoever that is. There's some risk. Now, if that happened all inside a general contractor contract, then it's probably no question at all. If it's a SCADA supplier outside of the general contract, that's where it gets a little fuzzier around who's actually got the performance risk. But Randy, to your point, it sounds like maybe the contract for the general contractor's contract addresses that. To me, it's the risk of integration. It's not,
Yes.
deliver the equipment and make sure the equipment functions properly. It's a matter of how do you deliver the equipment that's functioning properly, marry it up with the SCADA and put that all together, and the whole thing runs the way it's supposed to run. So it's the integration risk that's the thing that jumped out for me.
Yeah, I think you got a good think of it this way. The general contractor will supply a filtration system at Wells 3 and Wells 4 that will operate autonomously. But it won't be visible to the rest of the town or the rest of the town system. When the well is told to pump and produce water, the valves and pumps will come on. It will filter the water appropriately. It will add chemicals appropriately. But it won't be connected to the supervisory control system that most people depend upon to look at that operation and understand what's going on. But it will function by itself, but you won't be able to look into it. You won't be able to remotely interrogate it. Woodard and Curran then will take that system and integrate it into the supervisory control architecture so that you can remotely monitor the operation, see what's going on, and with appropriate security, change the mode of operation and oversee that. So I have to admit, I had to do a fair amount of reading to understand the division in the automation work, where they were drawing that line, because some of the words that they use are just unfamiliar to me and a little bit contradictory. But that's the way I understand this work, is that the general contractor will deliver a system that will function, and it will function by itself because it's got a local control system that understands the sequence of operations, the strategy for automation, and the philosophy for operation. But it will not be integrated into the town's supervisory control architecture, and that's the role that Woodard and Curran does. I mean, if you think about it, Woodard and Curran has been upgrading our legacy system that's been in place and functional for a number of years. To them, this is just another node on their network.
So Randy, not that you would want to do it this way, but are you saying you would technically be able to actually bring in Woodard and Curran after this system is totally up and running autonomously and introduce a SCADA system as an overlay on the existing system?
You could do it that way. It probably wouldn't be the most cost-effective way to do it.
Right. Yeah. But what you're saying is technically.
It requires some physical connections to the automation system that are most effectively done while you're doing the rest of the construction.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I think I realized where the gap is. I'm reading the Woodard and Curran's proposal, and it says that. So this is a proposal that they provided as a budgetary proposal. Actually, no, I think it's an executable proposal for the SCADA services as a direct purchase. And the engineering service will be provided to integrate the sequence of the control and monitoring the well operation, raw water flows, valves, backwashing, sodium hydroxide, it's a chemical, sodium hypochlorite, chemical, finished water, pH, water temperature, iron and manganese monitoring, chlorine residuals. This is deeper than either it's deeper than the specification and we're getting a lot and we're paying a lot of money, or they're over supplying. So that's where, maybe this is where I read this, Randy, and then you read the bid documents, right? That came out of the, whatever, the bid builder, whatever application, yeah. So that's where I was getting my cues from, was actually the scope that was in Woodward Curran proposal. So they think that they're doing this, that they are tying all these things together.
Well, I think the difference is that they use the word monitor. They don't say automate and control. They just say they're going to look at this data point.
It says no, will include control and monitoring of. So maybe that's part of the mixed signal, or the thing that's maybe unfinished in the clarity. That's not to say that, you know, the bid documents prevail, right? And if we need something cleaned up on the Woodward and Curran's proposal, that maybe they've maybe over proposed something, and that it'll be less because the contractor is supplying what you said there is in the document. So, and I personally hope that an OPM would help us through this. I mean, if that's all we're getting for $195,000 for an OPM, it just sounds like we're overpaying if they're not going to be, in a way, a representative, someone who can arbitrate, you know, on our behalf. I mean, especially noted that, you know, Mo doesn't have, you know, an engineer on staff or a project manager for this. So anyhow.
So I think just in listening to this discussion, which is exceptionally helpful, and I appreciate it. I mean, to me, on the technical aspects of a project like this, for the technical specs, I think we're relying principally on the professional competence of the people that we're hiring, right? The professional ability that they have, their kind of commitment to their craft, and the desire to do a good job and have a good project coming out of it. I think where you most need the oversight is on the desire of those same professionals to charge more for the professional competence that they're providing. And so I don't have a great concern that Woodward and Curran as SCADA implementer is going to try to pull one over on Woodward and Curran as OPM to the detriment of the town or the project. We have kind of within this project enough checks and balances between the general contractor and the designer and the OPM/SCADA provider that I don't know that the strict separation that you might want for a $25 million contract, where there's just going to be a lot of battles between the OPM and various folks along the way over financial issues to try to keep the price down. I don't know that there's a ton of value there. Or just in this discussion generally, I see there's a lot of value in having Woodward and Curran in place to handle these technical aspects of it and reliance on their professional competence. So I'm comfortable keeping them in both roles. I don't know. If the AG is comfortable with the structure without having to nest them below the GC, it almost strikes me as a little more, I wouldn't say, I'm trying to pick the right adjective here, but if they're both a subcontractor below the general contractor and above the general contractor, that seems more cumbersome and potentially introducing more issues than just having them off to the side doing something different, as opposed to kind of overseeing the general contractor, sort of also overseeing them. It seems like that introduces more issues rather than just saying, look, we as a town, based on our experience with Woodward and Curran, our confidence in their professional ability in this area, and the significant advantage it sounds like they bring overall to the technical aspect of the SCADA project, we'll live with whatever friction occurs by having them off to the side, but we want to go with them because we just see in general our system is going to be better off with them in this role. And I do see an issue with switching OPMs just to solve what might be a modest issue. Right? If this were a much bigger issue, you could switch an OPM. I think we're probably just at much risk switching OPMs and losing something in the process there as we are with whatever advantage you might have by introducing another kind of a fourth entity into this mix. So that's kind of where I come out with it. I don't know, Peter, Gus?
Yeah, I'll go first if you want. I agree with you, Mike. I think, you know, if this was a $12 million contract and it's split out 5 million for SCADA, 7 million for everything else, I wouldn't feel the same way. But I think taking into account the relatively small proportion of the overall project that's tied up in terms of cost, that's tied up with the SCADA equipment, I agree with you. I didn't start here, but having this discussion, I've agree with you, Mike.
I'm okay with it as well.
Okay. So do you need a formal vote or something from us to pick one, or are we just good with the discussion?
I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
the process is ongoing for both procurement of the equipment as specified and as scope that's already underway, as well as professional services. So we don't have to, nothing is actionable.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, thank you very much.
Personally, I appreciate you aired this out though, because on the surface, it looked like, you know, on the surface, it looks like a conflict with this discussion. I'm satisfied it's not. To the extent it is a conflict, it's a minor conflict.
Yeah, and we're sorry. Well, we apologize maybe taking an inordinate amount of your time, but we just thought it would be in the best interest of the town just to vet it out. And well, you know, it's the big building project of 2021. So and the fact it also crosses a couple of other committee jurisdictions, we thought we just wanted to make sure that you're sort of aware of it. And we thank you for your insight. So
no, I appreciate it. I think the amount of time was highly ordinate. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. So Mo, we have a couple of more contracts from you. We've got a request to approve change order number 2 for the final design of the water treatment plant. It looks like this is adding the historical and archaeological review and then some additional work from environmental partners. And
Yes.
then a risk resilience assessment for under the EPA regulations.
Yeah, so the risk and resiliency assessment is due by June 30th. That was part of the design of this of the 2 wells, and the archaeological investigations. We did the initial one. Now we are required to do further investigation. So it's another investigation that we need to pay for, and it's also with fire protection design from our design consultants for the building, which we were trying to get a waiver. Now we really we're not allowed to, so we're moving forward with that design as well. So that's what this change order is for.
Okay. Any questions, Pete?
I guess my questions, Mo, had to do with the fact that the sprinkler waiver, I guess, you know, someone was seeking a waiver. I guess the question is maybe, should we have known that we weren't going to get a waiver, and should that have been then planned? And then the archaeological study stuff, the Medfield Historical Commission pulled a trigger on us, I guess, and so that'll cost us another $32,000 to do that. Those two sort of, I understand those a little bit more. The last 2, I had questions about why those sort of weren't planned out in advance. The bidding assistance, why was that something that we're
Because the
having to
OPM
change?
was something that wasn't part of the original appropriation for the final design. The OPM was called upon us with the permanent building committee asked us to get an OPM for this project. So
And
that
requirement added the bidding.
Yes.
That hadn't been planned for. Okay. Understood.
Okay, and then the risk and resiliency plan EPA came out with we were required to do that. So that was added. That wasn't part of the original, because this appropriation is a couple years old already.
And the EPA regulations changed in the interim, you're saying?
Yeah, within the 2 years that
Okay.
when this, the original appropriation was done with this contract.
All right, that satisfies all my questions then. Thank you.
Gus?
Yeah, the only question I had, Mo, was back on the archaeological side. If I understand this right, originally the Mass Historical Commission asked for a survey. We did the site survey. It sounds like the results of that site survey in turn then drove a need for an intensive survey. So that says they found something and they had to look more closely. The write-up on item 2 says the timeline for MHC's review of the intensive survey and site examination reports will be determined by MHC. We hope it's done by July.
Right.
In that review, is there like a hyper-intensive survey that could be the next stage on this thing, or?
We hope not. We feel that once the survey is complete, the Mass Historical Commission will approve the project and we'll be able to move forward. So we're looking at probably a month or 2 delay, but I think we're going to be okay on our schedule. I don't believe that we don't feel they're going to find anything that's going to stop the project. But the second survey is to confirm what they might have found in the first survey.
Okay. So what I'm sensitive to is the risk that there's a third foot to drop, and I'm assuming it wouldn't stop a project, but it could lead to another change order like this, or partly like this one, or it could add even more time. I'm just trying to figure out how big a deal that is. We don't know exactly what they're going to, discover out there. But indications are showing that this is just a confirmatory investigation to make sure. That's all. Okay.
I mean, I think in general, if you find something, you could have to move it in a careful way is the general response. So I think Pete and Gus's questions covered mine. So I don't have anything further. Gus, do we have a motion?
Yes, I move that we approve change order number 2 for the final design of the water treatment plant.
Second?
Let's see, Mr. Marcucci,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yep.
And Mr. Murphy, aye.
All right, great. So the next item is, once again, Maurice Goulet to provide an update on nighttime infiltration and inflow work in April. Sounds intriguing. What is the nighttime infiltration and inflow work that's going on?
So as you know, we have some.
I do appreciate my little map here that you have of all the.
Those are the locations. So with our, we have an inflow and infiltration into our sewer system that we're trying to investigate and trying to resolve the issues. We get a tremendous amount of water that goes into the treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant at times, and that causes us with more money because we have to treat that water going through because it does go out into the Charles River. With this investigation, we feel that the flow meters that have discovered more flow coming through our system. We also are looking for leaks. We're looking for areas that the water level comes up, that it's coming into our system somewhere. It's supposed to be a tight system, so we shouldn't get this much infiltration. So when the reason for the overnight gauging of this system is because no one's using that system in the nighttime, and that's where we're trying to see where this flow is coming from and not from use from the residents. So it's important that this is a normal procedure in a lot of different cities and towns to investigate for I&I. So what we're doing is we're going to notify all the affected areas. We're going to be sending out phone calls. We're going flyers door to door in preparation. We're going to have one of my guys will be out there with this team. They're all going to have identification. They're all going to be, and they're trying to make as little noise as possible, but some of the areas they have to go through people's backyards to access some of the sewer pipes, especially the main transmission line, the interceptor that goes to the treatment plant, trying to make sure that we kind of find every area that we can to eliminate these flows that we shouldn't have.
Okay, and the flows that's essentially clean water coming into the sewer system.
Correct.
Right?
It's groundwater. It's it could be coming from sumps. We're just trying to find any connections that it could be coming from sumps. It could be coming from leaks, manhole covers that have been dislodged, anything that's leaking into the system that shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. Got it. All right. Any questions, Pete?
No.
Gus?
First, an observation similar to yours, Mike. I do appreciate how you skirted the sewer pipes to avoid my property, so I don't have to worry about having my sleep upset in the middle of the night. And I guess this means I can even get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night without worrying that I interfere with your. I'll tell you that you can let your folks know that the horse they might find in the pasture coming off of Harding Street is friendly, so don't be worried about her. Outside of that, looks good to me.
Right. Well, I will guarantee you that Bill Massaro will be awake during these hours to keep an eye on you while it's going on. So if you are in the area of his house, he will be spying out to make sure you're complying with all of these requirements. I don't have any questions. Appreciate your continued work on this. I know this has been a long-standing project, kind of a little bit of a combination of detective work and engineering work. So appreciate the continued work on this. Gus, we have a motion.
What are we moving? We're moving, approving the plan, or?
Do we need a motion or just an update?
It's just to keep you notified of what's going on, so that you're not, if someone gives you a call in the middle of the night saying someone's walking in the backyard, you're not totally unhappy with us.
We would put in the minutes like the old fashioned board minutes, like the report was accepted as progressive, right? Isn't that the old language of the old Robert's Rule of Order? And then Mo, are you also talking about the transfer station and recycling committee request, or is
I am not.
As well?
I believe it's the transfer station recycling committee. Is that right, Christine?
Yes, you and I will stay for the discussion, obviously, but we'll promote Megan to talk about.
I see Megan there.
Yeah, I'll promote Megan right now. And just so everybody knows, Bill Massaro confirmed he will be up and he will notify us if there's issues.
Can't hear me. Andy Costello is here right now as well.
Oh,
Did you promote her?
Oh, I see her. Okay, Andrea, there we go.
I can start my video.
Welcome.
There she is. Thank you. Andy, would you like to introduce? Would you like me to?
I want to say while she's coming on here, I like the letterhead with the official Medfield Transfer Station Recycling Committee letterhead. It's I like
Excellent. Thank you. Andy made that. She has
It's
a graphic
sharp.
designer in her background.
Very sharp.
Yeah. Okay. While we're waiting for her to unmute, maybe I will just say that every 2 years we come up with a new transfer station and recycling sticker for the transfer station. And we usually use this opportunity to consider the fee that will be charged. And back in January, our committee considered the fee, and we thought that a modest increase made sense at this time. So that was our recommendation, to increase it just the $10 over 2 years to $110, which you have in front of you. That is the recommendation.
Any questions, Pete?
No.
Gus?
I have one for Mo. What percent increase? This is one of the historic event where you'll hear me arguing potentially for increasing a fee or a tax. What percent increase have we seen in our tipping fees over the last 2 years?
So the last 2 years, we went up $5,000 each year. So it's been $10,000 since the last sticker increase.
Which is what percent?
Of the recycling fee, it's 10%.
Okay, that's so where I was going with that is looking at this 10% increase in the transfer sticker. My view is that increase should at least keep track with the percentage increase in our overall fees. So we're not at the point where the town is absorbing or subsidizing more. I'm not particularly trying to get the transfer sticker fees to pick up more than they already do. I'm just trying to keep them in line with the growth we're seeing. So sounds like that's what this is recommending, keeps it in line with what our overall growth and costs have been.
We did go up $25 the last 2 years. So, so this would be going up an additional, yeah.
Okay, no, it's a 10% increase, and that tracks. That was my question.
All right. I have no questions. I think this is a good number, and I think it's, I appreciate the recommendation. So do we have a motion?
Yes.
May I just make one more comment? Sorry, before you get there. The other element of this is that the second, third, fourth, fifth stickers, if you had them, was currently is $25 a car. We were suggesting you go to $30 a car, which could be, there are some families that actually get 5 stickers. So 5, 10, 15, 20, another $20 over 2 years. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention, ask you to consider that as well.
And personally, I didn't worry about, because that's already a discounted sticker. I realize that's a 20% increase on that, but it's already a discounted price. So I was more concerned with the main one.
Yeah, I have no questions about that one either. We're likely to be a three sticker family ourselves, and this won't discourage us from the additional stickers. So, Pete, anything else?
No.
All right. How about a motion from Gus?
Okay, I move that we approve the Transfer Station Recycling Committee's recommendation to increase the 2021 to 2023 transfer station sticker fee by 10% for the main sticker or first sticker that a family buys, from $100 to $110 for 2 years, and by 20% or $5 for a second or subsequent sticker for additional cars, raising that price for 2 years from $25 to $30.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
and Mr. Murphy, yes.
Thank you very much, Megan and Andrea.
Thanks, Megan.
Sure.
All right. So now we have Kathy McDonald, Outreach Director, request permission to hang flyers at Medfield State Hospital for May Mental Health Awareness Month.
Good evening, everybody. How are you?
Good, Kathy. How are
Very
you?
good.
Good, thanks. So I'm just here. I feel like after what you've been through already, this is a really light lift, listening to your earlier discussion. So I'm here on behalf of Medfield Outreach and administration of the Medfield Coalition for Suicide Prevention. As you may remember from last year, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we have a variety of activities going on, one of which involves the request of us using Medfield State Hospital property to hang some flyers. Those flyers would promote reduction in stigma, increase in awareness of mental health issues, and increase in resources to bring people's attention to local resources. We'd probably put QR codes on them, which would invite people to participate in the variety of activities that we have going on during the month of May, as well as directing their attention to our website and in further promotion of our goals under the coalition, our mission under the Coalition of Suicide Prevention. So the request is, could we please hang some laminated posters on the Medfield State Hospital property? At the end of the month, we will make sure we take them down and dispose of them properly.
Thank you, Pete.
No questions.
Gus?
Kat, I think you just partially answered one of my questions. When we say, I think of flyers as 8.5 by 11s, but you're saying posters that are laminated. So we're bigger sign, they're larger signs than just straight flyers.
Nope, they'll be 8.5 by 11, but we'll laminate them to protect them from weather and decay and the
Okay.
rest of it, just to respect the property.
Then the only question I'd have is, and where not specifically, but where are you going to put them?
Yeah, so last year I learned very quickly that the state hospital grounds are much bigger than we thought, and our little like 20 flyers didn't seem to go very far. So we'll make more this year. Last year we used ribbon to tie them around trees and on fencing, and those seem to be the best places because it was easy to adhere and easy to remove without destruction of any property. We'll probably put them around well-traveled paths near the canoe launch, near the trees, near both, the walkway, sort of the perimeter of where most people would do their foot traffic. And the other thing I should bring your awareness to, I don't believe that it requires any approval, but we're doing a virtual walk. It's really sponsored by the Medfield Foundation, who oversees the Coalition for Suicide Prevention, but there'll be a virtual walk during the month of May promoting mental health, move your body, keep your brain healthy, et cetera, with different drawings and giveaways to promote participation.
Perfect. Do we have a motion?
I move that we grant permission to Medfield Outreach to hang flyers at the Medfield State Hospital for May Mental Health Awareness Month.
Second,
Mr. Marcucci,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
yes.
and Mr. Murphy, yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Right.
Next item, COVID-19 status update. I saw that in the state, we passed the 1.5 million vaccinated number today.
Did. And just to let you know, the library is now open on a limited basis. And so that will leave our last public building to reopen will be the Council on Aging, which we talked about last week, and then we'll be fully open to the public again.
May 5th, right?
Correct.
May 5th. Grand reopening at the
We
council.
are having a grand reopening and ribbon cutting ceremony.
Excellent. That's terrific. Anything else on that?
I have nothing else on that.
All right. Number 7, federal funds update and discussion. CARES, FEMA, and the American Rescue Plan Act.
Nothing yet.
No news, no regulations as yet. All right. Fiscal year 22 operating and capital budgets and financial policies. I know you sent the updated budget worksheet of the warrant committee's approved. I understand the warrant committee's approved budget for their recommended budget for town meeting.
Correct. They approved it last night. There is one change to what I sent you last evening that I highlighted. We had originally recommended a $500,000 transfer to stabilization. That left $200,000 available for transfer as well. And the warrant committee, anticipating that the selectmen would probably want to transfer that $200,000, beat you to it and voted last night for a full $700,000 transfer to stabilization. So really can't thank everybody enough. Jeff, my team, his team have really worked really hard this year, especially during COVID, to come up with a budget that we could all live with. And the warrant committee had some tremendous questions for all of us that really made us go back and look at things and re-examine things from November to last night. So I appreciate all that hard work.
Yeah, it's been a really complicated budget season. It's usually you're just dealing with moving pieces for one budget, but we were also dealing with moving pieces for the current year budget and what was going to happen with that and how to deal with those issues and the interrelation of all of these government programs and other things. And so it's been kind of a more complicated jigsaw puzzle than usual. So I appreciate the work from the warrant committee, everybody who's working on this budget and building this budget over the course of the last really 9 months. In an environment of great uncertainty and under new circumstances. So that's good news.
Could I just make a comment on this? Because so Nick, just for your benefit, I'm actually trying to update my own score sheet with the updated numbers. I'm going to be gone for a week, so I probably won't get back to you until after I get back. But just trying to make sense of how some of the numbers changed on my score sheet relative to the others is where my questions are coming in. One, I did want to ask, the principal on debt went up by almost $1 million. Is that the water and sewer? Is that bringing water and sewer debt back onto that total?
That's correct. That had not been
Got it.
included up until recently.
Okay.
We added that in, and then obviously that's offset by a payment from the enterprise fund to the general.
Right. Okay. And I have some other, but I'll do it when I get back. Unless I really make progress tomorrow. I think it might take me a little while.
Problem.
The only other thing I wanted to mention, I know I sent it in the email, but for those who are still watching at home, this budget fully meets our financial policy that we set in place, which was the main goal we had starting the day after last year's town meeting, that was our #1 goal in this budget. And I'm pleased to report that it actually funds and creates our capital stabilization fund. So we'll take that to the voters for approval. I think that's something we should really be proud of getting moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Good note. All right, 2021 annual town meeting and warrant articles. I see in our update here, we're under 40. And in looking at them, I was starting to think that maybe if we squint and cross our fingers a little bit, we might be looking at one night, one afternoon and evening
So
town meeting with this roster.
I don't want to steal the town moderator's thunder, but we did meet last week, and we believe in combination with the consent calendar this year, we should be able to do this in one evening. We're still working on exactly how that will work, but I believe we are going to try our hardest to get it done in one evening.
Okay, I think that would be good.
Agreed.
I think that would be good. All right, so we'll take with this item because it's connected to it. If we could move up the interconnection service agreement with Eversource for a solar installation at the DPW town garage. I know Fred Davis from the Medfield Energy Committee wants to be heard on this, and this relates to a warrant article and the potential for a deferral of a warrant article related to this. So if we could take that together. Christine, do you want to just go over the interconnection service agreement?
Sure, I'm actually going to hand that off to Nick, who's become my in-house solar expert on that.
This is just an agreement with Eversource that the town garage system as designed at about a 200 kilowatt design would fit within Eversource's transmission system, that it's being accounted for, and it keeps the ball rolling in terms of any necessary check marks through Eversource to keep this project moving forward. There is additional paperwork that will have to be completed once this is done related to our incentives and other issues related to it. But regardless of what type of project that goes forward at the town garage, this just starts ticking our place in line in terms of Eversource's review and approvals.
Okay. All right. So Fred Davis,
Just before you do that, could I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah.
Nick, is this sort of agreement, the sort of document that puts us in line ahead of another project? One of the issues with Kingsbury Club was I was questioning whether or not our town solar at the old dump site was going to get pushed back because of the lack of capacity of the lines. Is that what the sort of an interconnect agreement does?
Yes, no issues were identified at this stage.
For this particular project,
Yes.
but this would be the sort of the project. This would be the agreement that we need for the transfer, not the transfer, but the old dump site.
This is the town garage. This is not for the dump. That would come.
I know, but I'm just saying that the dump is, it needs this sort of thing, and this is where if one project gets ahead of you, then you have to deal with all the additional connection costs. Am I understanding the process correctly?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. So while Christine promotes Fred, and Fred is going to introduce Haskell Whirlin from Solar Design Associates. So we have been, what's on the article for the town meeting this year is to authorize us to enter into a PPA. Fred has proposed that we defer that for this year so that we can make a budget request for the town to purchase a solar array itself and fund it itself, which obviously is not currently part of the budget. And so Fred asked for time at this meeting, which I think he's going to yield to Mr. Whirlin, to talk about, I guess, the advantages of ownership over the PPA, and then we can discuss that particular proposal. So Fred, do you want to introduce Haskell?
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having.
I don't see Haskell here.
Great. Okay.
One individual with the name just owner if he's here and wants to change his name, if that's him, but
He says he's on. I'm sorry, Nick, what'd you say?
there's one participant with the name just owner. Their real name is not showing.
So if that is Haskell Whirland, we'll
Right
have
here.
to change the name from owner to Haskell Whirland so we know that's the person to promote.
All right, as we wait, perhaps I can say a couple of things.
Sure. If the discussion ends before Haskell gets it, we'll move on, but go ahead. That's not an invitation to filibuster, but go ahead.
There were things I would like to say in any case. So Mike, I understand the way you're framing my appearance here tonight. I do want to say in terms of the interconnection agreement, I see no problem with it. I didn't even realize it needed a signature. So, and actually if Haskell is here and if he can get on, if you had any technical questions for him, he is the guy. But so in terms of the interconnection agreement, I don't think there's any disagreement. So the reason I wanted to jump on tonight is because it's a surprise to the Energy Committee that the project is moving ahead as a PPA and that the opportunity to move ahead as in different way is passed. And Mike, you explained that. Christine, you gave me a slightly different explanation. I don't know if there's any way to sort that out now, but I do want to just say that the Energy Committee has been working on this question, meaning the DPW solar. Okay, Haskell says he can't log on. Oh, you know what the problem might be, Christine? Did he need to log on with the invitation you sent me?
Nope.
Huh. Shoot. Okay, hang on one second. Okay, we'll see if we get that sorted out. So we have been looking at the DPW. Medfield Energy Committee has been looking at DPW solar for years. As a matter of fact, Haskell Whirland is with Solar Design Associates. Solar Design Associates was our initial solar consultant many years ago that helped us identify a variety of sites, town-owned sites in the town, and helped prioritize and helped us get to wastewater treatment plant as our first wastewater treatment plant. Just to remind us all, went through fully owned project and has been operating since 2015. 2016, public safety solar project came online. Both those projects, now 5 and 6 years old, as far as I know, have been operating with, they're both wholly owned by the town, have been operating with no problems whatsoever, no burden, and nothing but profit for the town. So each year we report in the Energy Committee report how many thousands, $82,000 just in SRECs. That's not energy savings per se. $82,000 just in SRECs last year from those two projects. Anyway, the question is perennial, PPA or purchase, PPA or purchase. So we've been going around on that, and Nick has been very helpful this past year, trying to get as good an apples to apples guesstimate as possible in advance, just to guide us. The Energy Committee, and specifically Penny Connor leading the Energy Committee's solar work group, reviewed the spreadsheet that Nick put together, which was best that anybody could do. And as a result of that, and it's not all financial, by the way, and that's okay. Haskell is here. That's terrific. So I'm leading up to your introduction here, Haskell. So the differential between a PPA approach and a purchase approach is not only what it looks like on the surface, in other words, the dollars and cents. There are other aspects here, and it's not all this is easy, that's hard. I asked Isaac Baker of Resonant to weigh in on this question, and he got you a batch of answers this morning, which was terrific, on the pros and cons of PPA versus purchase. And now there is this hybrid approach, this third way, that seems even more advantageous. Now we can keep hopscotching. In other words, Nick went back to a PPA provider and said, and they provided a better number than they had before. We could go back to another potential contractor and ask them for another number. But until it goes out to bid, you don't really know what the real numbers are. So at this stage, a contractor will want to put in budget numbers, and if they know it's going to go out, whatever the project is, know it's going to go out to bid eventually, they'll hold back their best number, as they should. And as we should on our end be putting competitive projects out to bid as competitively as possible. That's sort of is why over the years we've been working with Solar Design Associates, who's an independent firm. And this is your introduction here, Haskell. Thank you for being here. Haskell is with Solar Design Associates, who not only is probably the most preeminent firm in the photovoltaic industry. They invented the concept decades ago of putting photovoltaics on roofs. What a crazy idea. And what I call Haskell, he's the photovoltaic expert's expert. So we're very, it's a privilege to have him here. And thank you for being here, Haskell. And I hope you can address some of these questions.
Well, I will add a caveat that I got my second Moderna this morning. So if I sound a little slurry or maybe fall asleep, then I have a good excuse.
Or if you're too happy.
Yeah, here's my little sticker. I think Fred has summed up a lot of important points, and we look at the option here and ask ourselves, which way will we get the better installation for the town? We are interested in quality photovoltaic installations above all. We don't want to see corners cut. We don't want to see people save money to make a profit. We want to see a long-term 20 to 30-year system designed to last. And if we have a unified design that everybody is bidding upon, apples to apples, then we can evaluate each design or each bid on the same design. If each company proposes their own design, then they're able to find ways to cut corners. And we don't want to have apples and oranges and pears. We want to have a system that meets the NEC 2020 code, that is going to be compliant with the SMART regulations, according to SMART 2.0 regulations that are now enforced. And that means that we don't want to see plastic zip ties holding wires. We want to see stainless steel clips. We don't want to see EMT tubing on roofs. We want to see IMC or RMC that is not going to rust out in 2 to 3 years. You can see a system that looks great on day one, but come back 5 years from now and I can show you rusted EMT. I can show you wires that are hanging dangerously and potentially could create fires if they are not secured properly. So we're looking for a long-term ownership interest, whether that be the town or it be the PPA. It doesn't really matter to us. We want to see the highest quality system designed.
And so that's something you can put into the specs either way. Those kind of things go into the bid with whatever the financing mechanism is going to be, those specs are the same.
Absolutely. Again, I don't want to have the town just rush off and take a no bid cheap offer, not knowing that the design has elements in it that may be ways that they could reduce their cost to make that the least cost option. I want to note that I went to Belmont High School, and in my first year, 10th grade, 1972, we had a brand new high school with a swimming pool because the old high school had been burned down, among other schools that burned down in Belmont frequently. Today, Belmont is building a brand new high school for $300 million. Why? Because the building that they built in 1972 is not designed to last more than 50 years. I think that was a state project that required low bidder, and it got a low bid, and it didn't last. So again, a solar system should last for 35 to 40 years. The both the PPA and the resident offer have a 20-year inverter insurance policy, I hope, so that we know that inverters fail. We want to know that they're insured, so when they do fail, they're replaced at no charge to the town. In either case, you know, they have a life, maybe they're 10 years, maybe they're 7, maybe they're 12, but they're going to go at some point. So we know that, we budget for it, we make sure that that's included in the deal.
And that's true of a PPA or true of a build to own?
Again, those are like the details that we're looking for. We're looking for areas where there can be a fatal flaw, where the system can fail. And we're looking for opportunities to prevent that. We don't want to see a fire like the MacArthur School in Waltham that caught fire. There was a lightning strike down in Fall River. I mean, these things happen.
And I just to add a little bit of context, we have discussed a proposal, you know, a scope of work with Solar Design Associates for both routes, you know, to ensure that is the case, that any potential PPA providers would be bidding against the same documents. And then if the town were to own it, their scope of work to design it and put it out to bid as well. So to ensure, you know, as we're discussing here, to ensure that the project is properly designed and properly bid out, that would be the route if the town pursued the power purchase agreement option.
And can I just do a process check here in terms of understanding the conversation we're having tonight? Fred, you said this particular document that came in, the standards for the interconnection agreement, you didn't have any problems with that. So relative to tonight's action of approving this interconnection agreement, everything we're talking about right now is not pertinent. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it, but everything we're talking about right now is independent of the action that's on the table, just to.
As far as I know, absolutely.
Okay, so that's fine. The second piece then is, I thought there was a question around PPA versus purchase, but Haskell, what I'm really hearing from you is the town ought to be thoughtful before we actually sign an agreement with anybody. We should be thoughtful about making sure we specify a system that's, let's call it responsibly specified, based on the qualities that you're advocating for.
Absolutely.
Okay, and would we be well advised to look to the Energy Committee to at least facilitate the process to get us to that responsibly specified system?
That is what we've been working on for years, and Nick has been our primary contact for, what would you say, Nick, the last year?
Correct. And SDA is under contract currently to complete everything up to this point. And then, as I mentioned, we've already discussed potential scopes for the next steps of the project.
Right. And I think that's where we are practically, is if we're going to move forward, there's nothing in the budget currently to fund an ownership project, right? So the big financial difference between a PPA and an ownership is who's the capital provider for the capital construction, right? It's a financing question. It's not, it sounds like it's not a technical question. You can build the same system financed different ways. And so there's nothing in the budget, there's nothing in the capital budget, there's nothing in the budget the warrant committee has approved to pay for the system. And so that's why I framed the discussion at the outset that if we want to go the ownership route, we either have to overrule the warrant committee and add something to the budget after they've gone through the budget process, which I'm not in favor of, given that we spent so much time on this budget. The capital budget committee has spent a ton of time on that budget. But if ownership is preferred and it's the recommendation of the Medfield Energy Committee, and I don't know if they voted on this or not, then we would defer the warrant article for a PPA for this year. And then there'd be an application made to the Capital Budget Committee for the budget for next year, obviously with no guarantee that it would get approved, because you'd have to weigh it against everything else. But if the advantage of ownership is great enough that it's worth waiting another year, we could decide to defer that to the future. From my perspective, given our capital budgeting process, I don't think we can just add it to the capital budget now or add it to the budget. I mean, I think that time has passed. Or we could go ahead, as I think was was my working assumption, we'd go ahead for authorization for a PPA this year that we could then put out to bid with the specifications that Haskell and Fred are talking about.
So that leads to the third issue that I saw, which is basically the business argument for PPA versus purchase. And I guess, Fred, the question I'm not sure whether that automatically says the article comes off, because just because we get authorized to do something doesn't automatically mean we have to do it if we have a more compelling argument. But Fred, is there a business case right now for us not doing the PPA that's compelling?
Right. Up until last week or so, Nick, you and I had that conversation. Yeah, 1 week ago, I think. I was fully under the impression that I knew that the Energy Committee had grappled with these questions back and forth, and after multiple meetings, come to a recommendation that we then forwarded to Pete back on the 30th now, or on the 29th, that it go purchase. And this, as far as I knew, as I was hearing from town over the last, and I'm generalizing over the last couple of years, that's where we were headed. I'm not trying to pin that on anybody, but that was the general understanding. As again, we've owned the two systems that we have. We haven't gone PPA. We've made, and there's been no problems that I've known of that I'm aware of. Now,
just to push you a bit, Fred, I think the
Please.
answer to my question is no. We don't have a comparative business case. I'm not being critical. I'm just asking if the information is out there right now, we can make a decision about an article for town meeting in a month. If it's not there, then it's a different question, as I would see it.
so I'm sorry, couch it again. Yes, there was a business case. Definitely. We made a definite recommendation based on numbers as we had them.
Well, I mean, you've put together a recommendation, but you didn't come in and lay out a business case one way or the other. I mean, you sent me some emails today that were sort of answering questions and back and forth. I mean, I think the issue I have from a process standpoint is, again, if we're going to spend dollars on it, it's got to go through the budget process. And so that business case needed to be made in December. And if you've been working on it for 6 years, then we could have heard it in December, right? I mean, I think that's the issue, because the capital budget committee then could evaluate, how are we going to spend these capital dollars? Are we going to spend these capital dollars on this project, or is it better to go with an alternative financing mechanism for this project and use those capital dollars someplace else where we don't have an alternative? And that's the financial decision that we have, because there's not a PPA option for a sidewalk, right? Nobody's going to build us a sidewalk and then pay us to use the sidewalk, whereas somebody will build us a solar system and pay us to use the solar system on the building. And so when we're looking at sort of scarce dollars and a variety of needs, we do have to weigh those things. And I'm not saying which way the weighing is going to come out, but the weighing has to be done, and it's got to be done in a way different than coming here after the budget is done and saying, well, we should tack on another $200 or $300 or $500,000 to this budget to go this ownership route. I mean, that's the budgeting process question, which is independent of the merits of PPA, because this is what we've been trying to get away from on capital. Right, we've been trying to get away from the project that shows up 3 weeks before town meeting that we just have to do this year. And we've had those over the years. We've had things that show up that we didn't know about, things we didn't plan for, expenses that weren't in there, and that weren't weighed against other things. Right, and so it sort of privileges the proposal that gets in at the last minute and seems great in a meeting, as opposed to one that's been fully vetted through the whole budgetary process. So that's the process issue that I have, which is independent of the substance. My substantive issue is, as I've said to you, Fred, is that where we have these alternative financing mechanisms, I fully grant that if we are the capital provider, we should be paid for being the capital provider by having greater energy savings. In the same way that if somebody else is going to be the capital provider and somebody else is going to be responsible for maintenance and somebody else is going to be responsible for issues that occur, the person who's taking that off of our plate is also going to be paid for it, right? So our savings are going to be lower because the capital provider is going to take some of those savings. And for me, with a small town, with a small government, with limited capacity to oversee these projects, and this is what I said the other night at the school building committee meeting, that the burden is on the side that wants us to add to our capital stock that has to be managed and overseen. And I think we did a good job over the years adding a lot of stuff to our capital stock without really making a plan to maintain it. And so I'm glad that there hasn't been an issue with the systems we put in 6 years ago. But, you know, to Haskell's point about the high school, it built in 1974. I think it was generally true in municipal construction in Massachusetts for a long time that nobody thought about how long it would last, partially because the Commonwealth would pay the majority of the cost of these buildings. And so there's no incentive to maintain them. If you let the building go to seed and you only have to pay 25% of the cost of a new one, you get a new building every 50 years. Terrific. Now that math has changed, and I suspect the math will change on solar as well as it becomes more prevalent. As a town, you get stuck with it, right? You get stuck with the cost. And that's my concern, is that given the size of our town and our government, if we can share those costs, right? I mean, in some certain sense, the PPA is like a shared services agreement. You're going to have a common provider providing this. It's one thing if you're a big city or a big town and you have a department and you have people and you can manage it yourself, you can capture that. But where we are both capital constrained and resource constrained in terms of our employee time, and not that keen to add to those ongoing costs, that's where I think it shifts a little bit. And the business case has to be more compelling than just one is $10,000 better than the other. And that's sort of the substantive issue I have with PPA versus ownership. The process issue is kind of the budget ship has sailed a long time ago.
So can I address the process question first then? And before I jump into that, Christine or Nick or Pete, want to say anything about the process that Mike is referring to?
I guess I would think that the issue with the Energy Committee is that it really hasn't been staffed by town employees. And so that's probably maybe why the capital budget ship sailed without the Energy Committee's input, because there wasn't anybody helping the Energy Committee deal with those sorts of issues.
I mean, the capital budget is published. We've gotten multiple copies of it. I think it's the list of projects that were on the list have been on there for a long time. And I don't think you needed a staff person to say, hey, wait a second, the Energy Committee thinks there's another $500,000 expense on here.
I think that when there was an active facilities manager who was attending all of the Energy Committee meetings, that sort of discussion about what should be the requests of the committee for the capital budget might have been brought to the committee, and they would have responded to it, I'm sure. So I think it's just, we're a small town, so that we have staffing issues, and the Energy Committee really hasn't been staffed for a number of years, unfortunately. My questions, Haskell, have to do with the business part of it. How much of a savings? I've always heard that ownership is better because you do get the higher rate of return, and I'm just wondering what the quantum of the extra money would be for the town if we owned it.
My understanding is it's around $100,000 over the 25-year life of the system. So the big advantage is the town can go out to issue a bond at about 3%, 2 to 3%. And that's cheap money compared to the PPA providers are typically going out in the market 6 and 7%. So the town has the ability to borrow at a cheaper rate. That is what creates the differential in the total value savings.
It's about $4,000 a year.
Yeah, and is that nothing? Is that something? Again, it's a matter of how much work you have to put in to what you're getting back. You are getting the SREC income, which is a 20-year stream of income. You're getting the energy savings, which I believe is $33,000 a year. And when the PPA provider provides you a discount to your energy bill, 20%, 25%, that's roughly $8,000 versus 33. So you're capturing the savings, you're capturing the SREC income, or sorry, the smart income. I'm dating myself. And you're capturing the ITC with a hybrid model for the first 6 years. You're not able to take the advantage of the investment tax credit. The PPA provider is, and so is the hybrid model. So the question then becomes, is the burden of responsibility for being an owner worth the effort to make the additional savings? Or do you just want to wash your hands of it and say, we want the limited savings on our electric bill without having to do anything? It's a real question about administrative and time availability from the town.
I mean, either
So
way,
that's-
you're
that's where I'd like
increasing
to
the amount
jump
of
in, Mike.
solar in the world, right? I mean, so that you're adding to the amount of solar generating capacity either
So,
way. So in terms of
Mike, if I
the
can-
desire to increase that, you're getting the same amount of additional solar both ways. Is that fair, Haskell?
The kilowatt hours generated are independent of how it's financed. Yes.
That's yeah.
If I can jump in
Right.
on that.
Hold on,
Yeah,
Fred,
go ahead, Christine.
if I could just say something for a minute. So, Nick did discuss with me the ownership possibility. I assumed, and that's wrong on my part, that was going to be done with the existing $200,000 that was there. I've only recently come to learn that we were going to need additional money beyond that. When you and I met yesterday and started talking about the hybrid, I also have questions about the hybrid. It's never been tried in a municipality. I don't like when Medfield's a guinea pig when taxpayer money is at risk. I think there are a lot of questions we haven't answered, and I appreciate, Haskell, you getting back to me today with a list of those, of what you could answer, but there's some significant questions I have regarding prevailing wage. Who's going to manage this? Like Pete just said, we are limited in staff. Part of the problem we're having this conversation with process here is because we have limited staff. We only have so much bandwidth. We're in a pandemic. I'm just concerned why we wouldn't take what I consider to be the safer option for our taxpayer dollars, knowing that we can do the PPA agreement. We've gone 6 years without getting any movement on this. We've missed the savings, I assume, on that in the past 6 years.
No,
And-
not necessarily. Equipment costs have come down.
Yeah.
So 6 years ago, we might have put a 250 watt panel on your roof on the DPW, and today we're going to put a 400 kilowatt panel. The technology for inverters was terrible. They're better. They're still not great, but we're looking at storage that has dropped precipitously. So the incentive values have dropped with the technology costs dropping. And so the return on investment, the payback time, hasn't really shifted from the 4 to 8 years that it's always been. So again, the fact that you've waited has a double-edged sword. You didn't save the money back then. You didn't put a system that's antiquated now. Your 25-year life of the system and the 20-year SMART program payout starts when you start the program. It was a 10-year SREC.
So my question then, and I know we talked to Penny yesterday and she's not here. If we wait and investigate and determine whether or not the town of Medfield can do this hybrid option, we're also putting at risk that we're going to drop a lower block on the SMART program, correct? Absolutely.
And that was a concern of mine because you're in Eversource. Eversource right now is, I believe, in block 5. And as each block drops 4%, then the value of the savings drops with it. So the sooner this gets built in this time frame, the better off you'll be. If you go out to PPA, then it just becomes a kind of a challenge to which PPA provider has the lower cost of capital.
No, nobody wants to delay, Christine. I'm glad you brought that up so that we can, I don't think anybody is interested in delay per se. Nobody wants to delay. We would love to get this project going. Now, I want to come back to I think what you're focused on is this hybrid thing seems weird and different, and concerned that it will necessitate more management time and risk. So we did get Isaac to quickly give you some answers along those lines. That's what happened this morning. Excuse me. That wasn't from Haskell, but Haskell probably has insights. Just to put it pointedly, Haskell, what can you say for Christine or any of us? As far as you know, the hybrid approach, Isaac says it's no different from a PPA in terms of the paperwork and the agreements, et cetera. Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, first of all, we're doing the same model with the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority with a project in Central Square. And Collective Sun is the financing partner for Resident Energy. And Collective Sun has done this model all over the country. So you're not really the first ones to do it. You're not the first ones in Massachusetts. But I think that, the benefits of doing something slightly more advantageous to the town where you're getting the benefit of the ITC, the investment tax credit, and you're getting the ownership and the smart payments is kind of a trifecta. In the end of the day, the question really is, do you lose a lot of money by dropping from block 5 to block 9, depending on how fast the uptake is during the next 6 months? And how much money do you need to put down of capital to participate?
So let me ask you this, what would you recommend today, knowing that there's the possibility for prevailing wage in this? What is your recommendation for the amount of money we need to construct this?
Well, first of all, prevailing wage is not applied to the PPA model. So the PPA provider would not be required to use to prevailing wage.
But if we're buying it and constructing it ourselves,
I think
have to
that
go
if
prevailing
it's a
wage
hybrid
on it.
model, if it's a hybrid model, they would match the PPA financing model. So they would not also, because they are holding the title until the 6th year when they turn it over. So I think that they would not use prevailing wage in their model.
I disagree with that. It's public construction on public property. But see, again, this is a question that I don't have the answer to, and you're asking me to borrow taxpayer money for it.
Again, if you're going to say the PPA doesn't have to do it and the hybrid does, then the PPA holds an advantage. You're right.
Are you sure that PPA does not?
I don't know. I'm looking for the answers to these questions, and I'm reluctant to put any money in a capital budget when I don't have basic answers to these questions, I guess is my bottom line.
I'd recommend further research into this question. My gut feeling is that if you own it and you construct it, it is subject to prevailing wage. If a PPA third-party owner, private owner is building it, then you're not.
And the hybrid?
That's a question that has to be referred to somebody who is of a higher pay grade than me.
I mean, can I offer a suggestion here, though, just as a way to think about this? That, I mean, we're going to have other solar projects coming down the line, hopefully. I think my concerns about the resource and the time of town employees and long-term risk and the amount of capital assets that we ought to be assembling as a town of our size, that's going to be consistent throughout. I think it's clear there's a number of questions that people still have. But I wonder whether we ought to, even if Fred, if you're right, and the ownership of the Highwood is vastly superior, and we should obviously do that. I don't think we ought to make the perfect the enemy of the good. And I certainly don't think that the case that is here right now is worth reopening a budget that's been completed. And so what would the downside be of going ahead with the article, planning on a PPA for this project for this year's town meeting, hopefully getting something in place? That's certainly the fastest way to get something in place. And you can continue looking at it generally as the model. And maybe we can get to the point where we can do a comparison and decide just generally as a town, you know what, we have one PPA, we have two that we own, and we think ownership is better. And this is just going to be the way we're going to do it. And here's how we're going to plan out, consistent with our capital policy and consistent with the questions that any department has to answer when it wants to add a new capital asset to the town. That policy was not in effect in 2015. It was not in effect in 2016, but there's a series of questions that have to be answered before we take on the town's role as a new capital asset. So, I mean, what would the downside be other than potentially $4,000 a year? I'm going ahead with the PPA for this now. The Energy Committee can continue its investigation of these models. We can have a meeting on this in the clear light of day, and maybe it's going to be the kind of thing where one model is going to be better in one circumstance and one model is going to be better in a different situation, and there might be a different fit at different times, and we can look at it that way rather than trying to kind of jam this decision in a short period of time, kind of outside of regular.
Appreciate that, Mike. So here's one thing I'd say is I appreciate your interest, and even though Pete's our person on the Energy Committee, am I allowed to invite you to attend when we have these discussions? Because we have been having these discussions, exactly these discussions, and exactly these discussions on the DPW for the last year. They may or may not meet your parameters for completeness, but that's what we have been doing. So again, it's a shame that we're at cross purposes here, or a little bit.
We're not at cross purposes.
One of the things I want to point out is that it's important. It was important for Haskell to jump on here, and I really appreciate him doing this because it is entirely possible for a municipality to just sign on the dotted line for a PPA, no questions asked. I know Medfield would never be that extreme, but it is entirely possible to do that and be done. And if you want easy, that's it. But Haskell's here, and I hope you heard him say that's not necessarily a good idea. There are specs that his company has already been creating. And if you don't get into those quality issues, there are corners that are likely cut. And that's the biggest flag for PPA. A no bid
Well, Fred,
and no specs.
let me qualify that. What I'm saying is an RFP that goes out and there are multiple bidders gives the opportunity for the town to see the advantages of each one, compare them. To go sole source to a single PPA provider without going out to bid with an RFP is a mistake in my mind.
That's exactly what I was saying. Yes.
Is that what we
I agree.
were, I mean, I don't think we've had any discussion about, this is the first I've heard of going out as a sole source. I don't know that we've ever done that for anything. So I don't know if that's, Nick, you're shaking your head. Is that not the?
No, that's what I've been referring to earlier when we've had those conversations with SDA about what their scope would look like if we were to progress with the PPA option.
We would have an RFP, we would have specs, we would have everything. That would be the approach.
So Mike, just one more thing on inviting you to participate with the Energy Committee or give us a charge if that's what you want to do. Really, that's an open invitation. I would love more engagement. But the spreadsheet that Nick did produce on this question does come out, year one with a net positive, and every year thereafter a net positive. So in terms of a drain for the town, it's not a drain. And if we wanted to go back and say, hey, if only we had some experience with solar by this date, and we do, we have a bunch of experience. And again,
yeah, but I don't want to beat. I don't want to.
But I haven't heard of any problems whatsoever. So
yeah, I mean, I don't want to beat this dead horse because I don't think you're hearing what I'm saying, and so I'm not saying that it should be the case that if we are the capital provider, we should get paid more for being the capital provider. So I've granted in all of our discussions that if we own it, that will maximize the amount of money we're getting in any individual year. But there's a reason why not everybody is a capital provider, is because people who are providers of capital have to weigh the use of their capital among a bunch of different options. And so it's not simply a matter of saying if the only project in the world was this one, I'd agree with you. This is all we had. The only use for our dollars was this solar, but it's not. And we have to weigh a project like this where there are multiple financing options against projects for public needs and things that the public needs to provide our services where we do not have alternative financing options.
Are we up to our borrowing limit? Is that what we're saying? I have no idea.
Well, are we up to our borrowing limit? No. But do we want to keep borrowing more if we don't have to? Probably not.
Well,
so I mean, the goal shouldn't be to borrow the maximum we can so that other people can leverage our ability to borrow at a municipal rate over something else.
we will have more solar opportunities coming up sooner and later. They will be bigger. And I do want, while Haskell is here, while we're all here, I want to put this out there. So Haskell, please correct me. There's a general presumption that everything costs money. Of course, everything costs money. But there's a general presumption in the municipal world, that's the way things go. This is like an exception. And what we say generally about solar is it doesn't cost money, it makes money.
Yeah, and no one's, Fred, you're incinerating an army of straw men here. Nobody is arguing against this point.
We will be back to talk about other solar projects, and I want to make sure everybody hears that. And Haskell.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that 100%. That's nothing new. That's the premise of all of these things. That's why the PPA industry. Well, yeah, budget is not going down.
Could I ask one?
That's exactly the issue.
Clarifying question. It's just I have one question just to clarify things. If we go PPA, the town doesn't have to pay for anything. If we purchase, the town is financing everything. The hybrid model, what is the financing implication of the hybrid model?
I believe 12% is coming from the town, 88% is coming from the.
That's flipped the other way.
Other way. 88 from the town.
So it's almost like purchasing.
Yeah.
But it allows for the tax credits to be amortized over 6 years.
Right.
And we get an off, is this the right way to put it? Off the top discount of 12%.
It's a different value. It's a different value stack.
Right. Yeah. We're delivering a tax incentive to an organization that can use it. In exchange, they're giving us a 12% discount. So we're delivering value to them by way of tax incentives And that's what leads to that 12%.
I mean, Gus, it's just like some of these low-income housing or historic rehab models where,
yeah.
you know, essentially the people who can use the tax credit borrow the building for a while, and
Right.
then they return it to the municipal entity once the life of the tax credits have been played out. So
I have to make one statement here, though, Fred, in that I've enjoyed this conversation because I believe this is the first time where I've seen us all being happy to move ahead with the solar project and you urging caution or urging attention being paid to the finances. And it's kind of fun to have the shoe on the other foot here.
Gus, you don't believe it, but I've been listening to you all along.
I know you have. I know you have.
And I hope everybody realizes that the Energy Committee only has come to the Board of Selectmen with projects that give you lots of money.
And I can
town
attest
lots
to
of
that
money.
being true. Yes.
That
I
won't always
just
be the
keep making
case.
sure you keep it up.
Yeah, I'd like to, but I'm warning us that going off into the future, that won't always be the case. But as it has been the last couple of years, we've only come to you with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of goodies.
So Haskell, from your description that Cambridge Redevelopment is doing one of these hybrids, it seems to me that somebody should make a call to them to find out about the,
Yeah, well, the
Impact.
problem is redevelopment authorities aren't bound by,
they're not prevailing wage?
they're not bound by the same procurement rules we are. So,
Oh, I thought it might answer the prevailing wage issue.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's also an example of an organization that's substantially larger than the town of Medfield, right? I mean, the city of Cambridge is flush with cash, right?
Mm.
They have plenty of money.
They do.
Yeah, they have lots of free cash. They have hundreds of millions of dollars in unused tax levy. I mean, there's a reason their city manager was the highest paid city manager in the in the
And
Commonwealth.
actually, we have done, I can't tell you how many solar projects on the schools, the senior center, the fire stations, you name it. We're all over Cambridge, and
Yeah.
it's a very solar friendly town. I think they lean forward, and they're a great example. And I think they're an experiment, a laboratory, for municipal financing, where they have 100% plus green program, so that they are allowing people to pay a little extra on their electric bill to go 100% green, where they actually own the facilities, the local facilities, and they retire the RECs. They don't want to trade in the RECs. Everybody here is talking about selling the smart RECs. In Cambridge, they retire them to force utilities to purchase more. It creates additionality. So Cambridge is in another league. I don't expect Medfield at this point to be Cambridge, or any point ever. But Cambridge is giving us an opportunity, like a postcard from the future of what's possible. And I think we should watch what Cambridge does and to look at how it works, if it works. It's exciting.
So, and I appreciate, Christine, you keep coming back to this, not the only, but the same question, which I take seriously and Isaac took seriously. And as of this morning, he said he'll try to get an answer. I don't know if you have a source to get more quickly to an answer on that particular question about
no,
prevailing wage.
I mean, that question is the determination of how much money we would need to borrow to purchase this. So we're talking about going to print in a warrant, regardless of the process that we haven't followed, and we can take the blame for that.
I don't think you should. I mean, I don't think the capital budget is a mystery. The fact that we have a budget is not a mystery. It doesn't require anybody to just sort of send a 2-line email saying we have a request in the capital budget this year for $500,000. I mean, this budget has been circulated among this board any number of times over the process. So I don't think there's any criticism of Nick or Christine on this front for not getting in there.
I'll take the criticism. Hey, I don't know everything about everything. I wouldn't have, it went so. I've been a chair for a year and a half or something, and no capital budget item came up before us. But it's not something that I was aware of. I would have said maybe along the line somewhere, a year ago, Christine, or 6 months ago, Nick, what do you think we have to do? And maybe you told me then, and maybe it didn't sink in. I apologize that step wasn't taken by me. I'll take that responsibility.
I have a different view about this whole thing in terms of people taking responsibility or ducking or not being responsible. Listen, we built 2 new buildings, the public safety building and the DPW garage. And I think our level of sophistication at the point in time when we said it would be really great to have a design that would handle solar is we said, solar is a good thing. Let's build a building that can have solar. And what's happened is that now that we've done that and we're moving ahead with things, suddenly we're getting more sophisticated in how we think about things, which is, gee, there's more than one way to go solar and they have different implications. I mean, there's a process, sure, but I don't really think it's a matter of anybody being at fault. It's a matter of we're moving down a path that we're getting to be a more sophisticated developer, buyer, user, promoter of solar. It wouldn't surprise me 5 years from now, we'll be talking about different kinds of solar technology, or we're going to be talking about alternative energy generation technologies other than solar because something new comes out and, you know, we'll say, oh, we should have known that was coming 5 years ago when nobody knew it was coming.
So Gus, I want to pick up on that one word, sophistication, and it applies to what you said a minute ago, Haskell, that, you know, Cambridge and others can lead the way. Sophistication, though. So Mike, is this, and we can continue this in another discussion, but as you've said, you know, and you're back and forth with me and tonight and other times in the last few weeks, I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but something along the lines of you're concerned that taxpayers' money goes in and then taxpayers don't get benefit. And I think maybe it takes a little more sophistication to go to the next step to say, well, look at these projections. Electricity prices are definitely going to come down as soon as solar goes online. Insurance is going to go up this much. The smart incentive money is going to come into our pockets. In other words, those adjustments to budgets are real. We wouldn't be building the solar project if they weren't.
No, I'm not questioning that they're not real. I mean, I think there's a difference between, you know, taxpayers getting a benefit from lower taxes and taxpayers getting a benefit from the government's ability to pay for more services. Now, I think what's really been the case is as the energy, you know, we have lowered our electricity costs from what it would be otherwise, not necessarily lowering them in absolute terms. We've lowered it from what it would be otherwise. At the same time, the cost of providing existing services has gone up in other areas. And so it doesn't flow automatically back to taxpayers, right? So I'm not saying they're not getting a benefit from it, because otherwise you might be in a situation where if you had not done the solar project, that increasing cost of electricity would have squeezed something else out of the budget or required an additional tax increase. So that's not, but I think that we just should be clear when on the government side we talk about savings, what that actually means, right? And where that's going to go and where it's going to be realized. And a lot of times what it means, because Medfield generally taxes to the maximum of our levy, what it generally means is where we're having a savings in one budget, it gets reallocated to another budget, which is not a bad thing, right? Because the thing we're now doing in that other budget is probably more valuable to the town than just paying for electricity, which is something you just sort of have to do to keep the lights on, right? So if you can lower the costs of the things that you're doing just to keep the lights on, that's good, because you can spend that money on other services and other benefits and the rest. But I just always want to caution us when we're talking about savings that we're clear as to where that money is going. Because a reasonable question would be, well, if we're getting all the savings, how come my tax bill hasn't gone down?
Right, but remember, in this case, it's a number of budgets. So the savings, so just the numbers I'm looking at right here, just to throw out the first year's worth is 18,000 something in exactly in electrical savings, but also 48,000 something in smart incentive, you know, gravy, money just flowing in. So that, if that can be budgeted for, anyway, I get you. I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying. I'm picking up on Gus's word sophistication. If we want to go back to this project or the next one, want to present to the town, this is the project, this is the cost, this is the benefits, not just savings, benefits, and this is how they balance out to be a huge net benefit. You know, is that overly sophisticated, or is that the sophistication we need? And can we be clear that those change, if I would call them changes in budget for that year, are real? I think we can.
I-
and should.
Again, I don't think this is a disputed point. Again, I don't think anyone is disputing
Okay.
this point.
Good. Okay. Good. Thank
Fred,
you
I
for answering.
think, I think the lesson here, Fred, is what you're talking about there. Yes, if we have that picture and it's a comprehensive picture, then we can deal with the investment, the cash flow and the return and where the savings go. But right now in this conversation, we don't have that picture. We have anecdotal, data points maybe. And I'm looking forward saying, so this kind of a conversation should be held when that analysis is done. Those benefits, those savings are laid out in clear terms so that you can look at it from a business case standpoint
Right.
and
We-
reach a decision. Right now,
we
we're
did
not in a
do-
position to do that.
I hear you, Gus, and we did do that analysis, and it wasn't on the agenda tonight.
Yeah.
And
But
how we
Fred, I
can
mean,
get
you were
on the-
still getting emails today answering some questions, right? So
Well,
maybe-
the specifics that Christine is asking are very, very good specifics. But on the general business case, we definitely have had that. Pete, we got it to you. I'm looking at the dates a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, some things were missed this time around. Again, I take responsibility to the extent that it's on the Energy Committee. I invite more engagement with the Energy Committee. Decisions were made. Hey, now it's Article 18. Now that I've looked at the exact wording, right? Article 18 explicitly calls for PPA. So the Energy Committee could have, should have been consulted before that was adopted by, it's an energy warrant article, energy related warrant article.
Who submitted it? Who initiated?
Nick and I did on behalf of the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
And again, that was what we were discussing in the early stage of the design.
Yeah.
And, this idea of town ownership has come up since then. And I don't think it's bad to have a debate. I think it's healthy. I think it's good to look at the pros and cons of all of this and really understand it. And I think the landfill is a much bigger opportunity.
Mhm.
This is a small, relatively small, 200 plus kilowatt system. And it's a good learning experience. I think the landfill is going to be a much larger capacity system.
I would hope so.
Well,
We'll be back to talk about that and whether that comes first or solar at the new elementary school. I don't know which, but we'll be back to talk about solar. And thanks. I don't know if we've gotten to the end of this discussion, but I really appreciate everybody taking the time, especially Haskell, to come out and appear before our Board of Selectmen. I really appreciate it, Haskell.
Yep. Thank you, Haskell. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you, Fred, as always.
I did
Thank you,
take
Haskell.
one good idea away, Haskell. I think we need to try to sell our Ezrex to Cambridge.
Great idea.
I'll just retire them.
Yeah.
That's, what do we care?
Yeah. So I guess we need I think we need a motion to approve the interconnection service agreement.
Yep, I move that, let me see where the thing is. I move that we approve the interconnection service agreement with Eversource for a solar installation at the DPW Town Garage.
Good, thank you.
Thank
Now
you,
we can-
Haskell.
Now
Nice
we can
talking with
apply
you.
for the SMART program with that in hand.
Excellent.
What,
Thank you.
does that need anything else from Medfield? And how long might that take?
I have just the action items from SDA today. So
I
I
just
think
have-
we are in the process of applying.
So about how long might we guess?
It's just the speed of Eversource, roughly. They've actually been very responsive on these smaller projects, I have to say. I would say 60 days probably or less.
And that locks in our tier?
You get through in your block assignment, and we're also going to apply for net metering credits, I believe. It's a question of AOBCs versus net metering credits. Nick, you've been over this with Stephen, I believe.
yes, that's correct. He sent me some information today and asked me to get moving on a couple things.
Yeah, so we have to apply to Mass ACA for the net metering allocation, and that would allow, for the project to proceed to the RFP stage.
We still need a roll call vote on that last motion, Gus.
No, I know that, Pete, did you second it? I didn't hear the second.
Second,
He did.
I did have one question that I forgot to ask. Who is it that's actually signing this on our side? It's identified as the interconnecting customer. Is it authorizing Christine to sign?
I'd say authorize the town administrator.
Authorize it, so I'll amend the motion, move that we approve the interconnection service agreement with Eversource for a solar installation at the DPW Town Garage and authorize the town administrator to sign the agreement.
second,
Mr. Marcucci,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
yes.
Mr. Murby, yes.
All right. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you,
Thank you
Fred.
very much.
All right, so we have a request from the town administrator to approve Melanson Heath as the town's auditor for fiscal years 2021, 22, and 23. This would be a change in auditor for us. I think we talked about it last year that it was time to change it up. So, Christine?
So we went out to bid on this. We received 2 bids back. We received one from Melanson Heath and one from Clifton Larson. And my recommendation is to go with Melanson Heath at this time.
They were the lower bidder.
They were the lower bidder.
Yeah, I read their submission and everything else, and I thought, pretty good. Pete, any questions?
No,
Gus, any questions?
No questions.
Yeah, so I thought they had pretty impressive and $10,000 cheaper. So do we have a motion?
Yes, I moved that with the town, we award the town's audit contract for fiscal years 2021, 2022, and 2023 to Melanson Heath.
second,
Mr. Marcucci,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yep.
And Mr. Murray, aye.
Great. Next is to accept the FY21 firefighter safety equipment grant from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Fire Services in the amount of $15,000 to purchase new brush gear and authorize town administrator Christine Truweiler to sign the standard state grant contract. This is something that's been in our capital budget and capital plan and now will not have to be funded with tax dollars. So very good work by Chief Carrico. Any questions, Pete?
no,
Gus?
No.
All right. Do
I
we have a
move-
motion?
I move that we accept the FY21 firefighter safety equipment grant from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Fire Services in the amount of $15,000 to purchase new brush gear and authorize town administrator Christine Trierweiler to sign the standard state grant contract.
second,
Mr. Marcucci,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
yes.
Mr. Murby, yes.
All right, consent agenda, 3 items. Boy Scouts request permission to camp at Medfield State Hospital on April 10th to April 11th. The Rolling Rally graduation request permission to post fundraising signs in the approved locations. And the Transfer Station and Recycling Committee request permission to post signs in the approved locations for the Curb Alert program. Any questions on the consent agenda?
Nope.
Is there a motion to?
This will be a dumb question undoubtedly. The Curb Alert program, is that the weekend pickup, the swap that we're doing off? What is the curb? That's the weekend swap from the curb. Okay, just want to make sure.
I guess the swap is not yet reopening, so.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah, I
so-
just want to make sure that I really did know what that was we were referring to. And I thought I did, just want to confirm. Okay, I move that we approve the items on the consent agenda.
Second,
Mr. Marcucci,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
yes.
Mr. Murby, aye.
All right, town administrator updates.
Actually, just a quick update. Mo and I had the opportunity to meet with Nancy Irwin and talk about the swap, which is why you're getting the Curb Alert program information tonight. We've been getting a lot of calls, and in talking and consulting with Nancy, the swap is not ready to open at this time. So we're going to hold off on opening that, particularly due to COVID, and we'll be reconsidering that on a monthly basis and hoping for a fall reopening if we can.
Terrific. Anything else?
Nope, that's all I have this evening.
Next meeting dates, April 20th, optimistically skipping April 27th. I have a feeling we'll be meeting April 27th, but for now we can all hope springs eternal, but I suspect we'll meet on the 27th, May 4th, May 11th, and the annual town meeting on May 17th. Selectmen reports, Pete,
Nothing.
Gus.
I have an editorial comment. I had a couple of conversations with a couple of parents here in town over the last week. And to illustrate something, I'm going to start with a story of an experience I had early in my 20s when I was in the Army. Back in 1978, I had a opportunity to go over to Germany for an exercise, multi-week exercise, which was known as Reforger, which was the return of forces to Germany exercise. And what they did is every year they did it to basically demonstrate to the Russians that the NATO countries were capable of working together. And so the Russians better not think about trying to intrude on Western Europe. It was the first time I'd been to Germany. We were up in the northern sector up near Bergen-Belsen, which is where Anne Frank passed away or died. And one of the things that struck me up there was the number of plaques on almost every major intersection in that part of the country, at least. There were plaques and signs that basically documented effectively the atrocities of the Nazis during World War II. And my comments here are not to try to belittle that or trivialize it, but my thought at the time, I was probably 23 years old, was to wonder about what a young German growing up in Germany grows up like when every street corner that you live near has a story about how terrible your country was not all that long ago. And I genuinely wondered, what does someone growing up do with that? Do they wind up hating their country? Do they wind up hating the message? How do you deal with that? I had two conversations this week, and I'm not shooting at the schools, although this is going to largely first go to the school committee, the superintendent, the school administrators, the teachers, and more broadly, the adults here in town. The responsibility for helping our young people in this town grow up from an education standpoint is primarily with the schools, but that responsibility rests with all of us. The conversations that I had with these parents had to do with communications that had gone out to their children electronically with links to internet sites that then in turn had subsequent links to other internet sites. And the conversation was around how inappropriate some of those internet sites were for children to get to, especially to be pointed to by adults here in town who have a role in educating them. I went to a couple of them, and they're bank shots. It's not the direct links. It's the links to the links. One of them was basically borderline pornography. It's modern day entertainment, but it was borderline pornography. The other one basically was addressing, or ultimately wound up with kind of the political line of thinking that we hear a lot of today around the colonizing, patriarchal, white history of this country. First off, I disagree with it. I think it's sexist. I think it's racist. I think it's revisionist. So on the merits, I disagree with that messaging as something that just goes out there to explain where we're at. And I don't think we need adults pointing students to those kinds of things that are not really providing a total picture. But the reason I bring this up is, in the same way I found myself wondering about what young Germans grew up like in a country where everywhere they turned, they were reading a story about how rotten their country was. I don't think we're doing as good a job as we need to do to help our young adults grow up in this town if we are doing those kinds of things. I'm not saying they were done intentionally, although in this particular case, the issue came up 3 different times. Presumably it was fixed, except it came back in a different form 3 different times this year. We have to do better. We really have to do better in bringing our kids up. And we have to be able to differentiate the difference between educating children and indoctrinating them. So I've got to leave it at that. I've seen some of this stuff with my own eyes. I think there's a lot of people that need to rethink what they're promoting and how they're doing it. because I don't think we're doing I don't think we're doing some very good things for some of our kids in town. And we ought to be more thoughtful about it.
Just who was this, who was sending out this material?
It was coming from the schools. I want to be real. I don't think there's any purpose for me to specifically call anyone out. It was coming from the schools. I don't believe the intent was to drive people to some of the sites or drive kids to some of the sites that they could get to through the communications. So I don't want to suggest that. I do think, though, the net effect is that it pointed kids to directions and to messaging that I think is counterproductive to the development of our young adults. I think it's damaging to our country. I'm not trying to whitewash anything around history, but some of the things that we hear in today's world are just not, they're not true. And I think it's important for particularly those people that communicate routinely with children to be very thoughtful about what they're setting them up to find. They'll find some of it on their own. There's a difference when it's the adult leaders that are in, pushing them in that direction, whether intentional or not. End of sermon.
Well, I mean, I think I haven't looked at the site, so I'm not going to comment on the specifics. But the question you raise is a difficult question, because the flip side of that, of course, is if it were the other way, to take the example of Germany. I mean, how would someone who was a victim of those atrocities or whose family was victimized, if that wasn't addressed at all, feel if the history that was told was the history of just the glorious right. history of the German people, and say, well, wait a second, this was, and I think that's right. the challenge. And I think, we're obviously going through as it is periodically a particular reckoning on these issues now. And I think the question is not whether that's reckoning is going to be reckoned, but what comes out of it, right? I mean, I think in any of these situations, there's always growing pains, right? There's always going to be growing pains. There's always going to be, and the opportunities always bring out extreme positions, right? And the reality is history is complicated, and there's many different histories, there's many different stories that are a part of it. And this question of how do you pass that history on to the next generation, sort of warts and all. And I mean, I think that ideally you want the through line of what the country is truly about to be the best of the country and not the worst of the country. But taking into account the worst aspects as well, and recognizing that's part of a history that we all bear and a history that has a lasting impact. And I think it's doubly difficult to do this in a situation where everybody's stuck at home and very, very online, which does not lend itself to discussions of any kind of nuance or complexity. But I think you're right that this is something that everybody who has responsibility for children, starting with their parents, obviously, who are the primary educators of their children, has to address. And I do think from a town leadership standpoint, we have to, I think, model the ability to talk about it in a constructive and democratic way, and not in a shouty, name calling, attacking, let's retreat to our silos. And only, I mean, one of the big problems we have is that people only get their information from people who they kind of already agree with, right? And so breaking through that in every way is a challenge. So I thank you for raising the issue. It's probably more complicated a topic than to address during our selectmen reports. And I can't speak to the specifics of the sites you're talking about, but it's a very challenging question. And I think we're again, as a society, working through that now in an important way. It's obviously things we've been talking a lot about with our own children. So
Mike, to your point, when I first ran for selectman, that was a few years ago, where the political climate had already gotten a bit more polarized. And I understand this is just one little town in one of 50 states in a country that's headed in a direction in many ways that right now at least is heading in some directions that certainly I'm not happy with. But I've always looked at this as one bastion that will maintain that civility, that maintains the respect, that's open to different views, and that doesn't get sucked into the mainstream of the kind of the collective thought that you can find in lots of places. And so there, and that's the reason I'm bringing it up. As I said, this is not actually, I didn't bring it up because it was a comment about schools. I brought it up because it's a comment about all of us, what this town is trying to do in terms of helping its young people grow up to be responsible citizens who care about others, who know why they're here, who know what's good about this country and what's bad about it, and are committed to trying to do something about it. What I heard from a couple of people this week was not something that promoted that direction, in my opinion.
So
All
it
right.
sounds like a different sort of thing that I've been thinking about recently, and which is the lack of civility amongst ourselves. I'm not a huge participant in social media, but I see things on social media that really disturb me about the way that people in our town are treating one another. I read today that one of the school committee candidates that had been subjected to some fairly horrible sounding treatment, including, I thought she said her kids. It just sounded terrible. I know that Wellesley actually has started an initiative on trying to assist the residents to be more civil. It's actually coming from someone on the Board of Selectmen over there. I think that it would be nice if we could somehow, as Mike says, model the behavior that would be appropriate. I don't think that adults in town should be fighting with college kids in town on social media over issues. It doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah. Well, I will say I've been off social media since the beginning of the year, and
Good for you.
it's been a good 3+ months, and I'm not eager to get back into it. So I apologize if anyone sent me a message or wished me a happy birthday or something. I haven't gotten back to you, but
Yeah, I'm always shocked when somebody tries to message me in Facebook because I don't understand it well enough to
Right.
see it and get back to them.
all right.
That's all I had.
Anything else, Christine?
I have nothing else this evening.
All right. Do we have, there's a hand up.
Oh.
Hilly Passas has a hand up. If you want to, we can bring her in.
That was fast, Chris.
I was just sort of listening in while I was still eating my dinner, and I just wanted to speak to Gus and his wondering what it's like to grow up in Germany. So I am German and I grew up in Germany. And yes, that discussion obviously has been and is still all around us. When I was growing up, it was particularly difficult because it wasn't, way back in time, it was our parents and grandparents who were involved in some way or another. So it was very personal and very difficult, even for people who looked back in dismay at what had happened to them or to their family or, in their own actions. I think overall what happened in the last, 60, 70 years is that there has been, and I agree with all three of you, there has been much more of a differentiated view of what everybody is capable of doing and who we are and how cautious we have to watch what we and other people are saying and doing. And that relates to the civility, that relates to shades of gray versus black and white. And I actually think that what I've seen in neighboring countries that have either been made to collaborate or were adversaries of Germany, that there has been much more of a black and white view maintained. And, it's you go to France and you still get spat on as a German in northern France, even though the First World War is a long time ago. It goes transgenerationally instead of looking at people making choices at the moment and the need to learn to make very, very nuanced choices. So I agree with all three of you, and Gus and Mike know that I'm still very active in Scouts, and I really support civility and, bringing yourself into the community to support community spirit and pride of nation. So I think all these things can live together, but it's the thoughtfulness that you bring into your decisions and into your actions and interactions with other people is just really important. So going back to Gus, I think just exposing young kids to these sites is horrible without guidance and long discussions, ongoing discussions with parents and everybody involved. So
I've, probably at a minimum, one solution is probably to make sure that the things that it's being made transparent to parents so that they can make their own decisions about when I'm particularly sensitive to younger kids. To Mike's point, as you get older, you maybe get the somewhat simplified version of what your country's all about when you're young, which at least gives you some sense of thinking your country's worth something. And then as you mature and you learn more, you realize that, well, nobody's got a clean record. And then you grapple, you get to grapple with how decisions were made that weren't, in our perspective, we recognize are not right. You can't change the past, but you can commit to changing the future. And if you start too early, only introducing the bad, then I don't know that either people embrace that it's really bad or they reject it all. And that's that. In the case in Germany, that's what I was worried about, is not someone like you who is close enough to the event. It's someone who is far enough away from the event that they can't identify with it in the same way that someone who lived close to that period can, who only hears the story. And if the story basically tells them they're bad, if you can't identify with it and you're being told you're bad just because of who you are, what do you do with that? And I think a lot of people wind up rejecting it and you almost get a worse result. That concerns me. I do appreciate your comments though, Hilly.
Yeah, thank you, Hilly. Thank you, Gus and Pete. I think we're at the end here. I think it's a note to end on there. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.